Now, let's shift from written texts, which we've explored before, to spoken conversations. You might think speech is more straightforward, but it has its own set of fascinating complexities, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. And in many ways, speech actually amplifies the ambiguity we sometimes see in writing.
How so?
Well, people don't always say exactly what they mean, right? And they don't always mean exactly what they say. Speech is often less explicit, much more context dependent.
Okay.
And this brings us into the fields of pragmatics and conversation analysis. Really interesting stuff.
So pragmatics, that's about figuring out the intended meaning, beyond just the literal words.
Precisely. Pragmatics studies how people make sense of what others mean in specific situations, often by inferring unspoken intentions. It involves understanding things like Grice's cooperative principle.
I think I remember that. The idea that we generally try to be helpful in conversation, truthful, relevant, clear, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But the interesting part is when people don't follow those maxims perfectly.
Like the famous, do you have a pen example. You're not really just asking about pen possession, are you?
Right, you're usually requesting to borrow one. You're flouting the maxim of relevance, maybe, because the literal question isn't the main point.
Or like in Calvin and Hobbes, when Calvin's mom shouts, what are you doing to the coffee table? And the answer is literally.
Yeah, yes. He takes it literally as a request for information. But she clearly meant it as a rebuke, an expression of shock. She was flouting the maxim of quantity, probably, by not explicitly saying, stop doing that.
So Calvin's being deliberately uncooperative there, linguistically speaking.
Pretty much. And sometimes this literal interpretation is used strategically. Think about the response, all lives matter, to the phrase, Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
Taking the Black Lives Matter slogan literally ignores its specific contextual meaning, which is about highlighting systemic inequality where Black lives often don't seem to matter equally. The all lives matter response sort of uses that literal meaning to sidestep the actual issue being raised.
So flouting a maxim isn't always about lying or being unhelpful.
Not at all. It can be a way to create implicature. That's when a speaker expects you to infer a deeper meaning precisely because they've broken a conversational rule.
Okay, so it's like a coded message that relies on shared understanding.
Exactly. And this connects to another key idea, speech acts.
Doing things with words.
You got it. John Austin, a philosopher of language, pointed out that some sentences don't just describe reality, they perform actions. He called them performatives.
Like, I now pronounce you married, or I sentence you to 5 years.
Those are the classic examples. The words themselves, in the right context, bring about the state of affairs they describe. But Austin realized pretty much all talk performs actions: warning, apologizing, requesting, promising, thanking.
So even just saying watch out is a speech act.
Absolutely. It's the act of warning. But for a speech act to work, to be happy or felicitous, as Austin put it, certain conditions have to be met.
What kind of condition?
Well, you usually need conventional wording. You need the speaker to have the right authority. A random person can't just declare people married on the street.
Right.
The recipient needs to be able to understand and sometimes comply, and it often needs to happen at the right time and place. You know, the captain can marry people on the ship, but maybe not once they're back on dry land.
Right.
If those conditions aren't met, the speech act fails, it's infelicitous.
Okay, that makes sense. Understanding pragmatics really helps decode those unspoken intentions and actions hidden in everyday talk. It helps avoid misunderstandings.
Definitely. It makes you a much more savvy communicator and listener.
So while pragmatics looks at individual utterances and implied meaning, what about the overall flow of conversation?
That's where conversation analysis, or CA, comes in. CA zooms out and looks at the structure of interaction itself. How do speakers actually build a conversation together, turn by turn?
It focuses on the sequence, how one turn relates to the next.
Exactly. CA scholars look very closely at recordings of real conversations. They're interested in how speakers make meaning by attending to the structure, particularly how utterances fit with the ones that came just before.
Like question-answer pairs.
Precisely. That's a classic adjacency pair. One person's utterance, like a question, creates a sort of slot that expects a certain type of response, like an answer, or a greeting expects a greeting back. An offer expects an acceptance or rejection.
And some responses are more expected or smoother than others.
Yes, that's the idea of preferred versus dispreferred responses. The expected easy response is preferred, like accepting an invitation.
Yeah.
A response that goes against the grain, like rejecting an offer or disagreeing, is dispreferred. And when people give dispreferred responses, they usually do more conversational work.
What kind of work?
Things like pausing, using hedges, like I'm not sure,
Yeah.
giving elaborate explanations or apologizing. It's all about softening the blow, managing the potential awkwardness of not giving the expected response.
Can you give an example?
Sure, think about that classic, sometimes painful love you exchange at the end of a phone call.
Oh, yeah.
You know, where one person keeps saying love you and the other keeps responding with just night or bye.
Mm-hmm.
The repeated night responses are clearly dispreferred replies to the escalating expressions of affection like love you or love you forever.
Right. They're not matching the sentiment.
Exactly. And the person saying night is signaling a desire to end the call, but perhaps without wanting to explicitly reject the affection. So the other person has to keep trying, keep escalating maybe until they get a more reciprocal preferred response like love you too, or more definitive closing. It shows all the work involved in navigating those dispreferred moments.
Wow. So even just how quickly or directly someone answers can reveal a lot.
A huge amount.
Yeah.
Conversation analysis uncovers this really intricate, often unconscious dance of turn-taking and response that structures all our interactions. It makes you so much more aware of the nuts and bolts of social engagement.
Okay, so beyond just the meaning and structure, we're also constantly managing how we appear to others, right? How we present ourselves.
Absolutely. We're constantly, consciously or unconsciously, negotiating our identities and our relationships in every interaction. And this brings us to the crucial concepts of face and framing.
Face. Like saving face.
Exactly like that. In discourse studies, face refers to that negotiated public image, that sense of self-worth or dignity that we all try to maintain and that we expect others to respect. It's mutually granted by everyone involved.
So we all have an interest in maintaining our own face and maybe helping others maintain theirs.
Precisely. We talk about giving face, helping someone maintain their dignity, and avoiding losing face, which is, being embarrassed or humiliated.
And we use specific strategies for this.
We do. Broadly, there are two types. First, involvement strategies, sometimes called positive face strategies. These aim to build closeness, rapport, solidarity.
Like using first names, informal language, showing interest, finding common ground.
Yes, all of those. But interestingly, involvement strategies can also be used to assert power. Think of a teacher using very informal language with a young student, or a boss being overly familiar with an employee. It can create a sense of hierarchy, too.
Okay, and the other type?
Independent strategies, or negative face strategies. These are about showing respect for the other person's autonomy, their space, their right not to be imposed upon.
So more formal language. Indirect requests. Apologies for imposing.
Exactly. Things like, excuse me, would you mind? Instead of just do this. It signals respect for the other person's independence.
And how we use these depends on the relationship.
It does. We often talk about face systems. If people are distant but equal, like maybe two professionals meeting for the first time, they might use a deference face system, relying mainly on independent strategies.
Okay.
If they're close and equal, like good friends, they'll likely use a solidarity face system with lots of involvement strategies.
Okay.
And if there's a clear power difference, like a boss and a new intern, you get a hierarchical face system. The person with more power might use involvement strategies downwards, while the person with less power uses independent strategies upwards.
But you said these aren't just reflections of existing relationships.
Right, that's the key point. They're also resources we use to manage and even change relationships. Choosing to use involvement strategies can make an interaction feel closer, or perhaps assert dominance. Choosing independent strategies can make things feel more formal, more serious, adding weightiness.
So you can actively use these strategies to shape the interaction.
Absolutely. Understanding face strategies helps you consciously manage your own social presence, build rapport more effectively, or navigate those tricky power dynamics much more skillfully. It's a core part of social intelligence.
Okay, so that's face. What about framing?
Framing is about how we signal and understand what kind of activity we're actually engaged in. To make sense of anything someone says, we need to interpret it within an overall activity or frame.
like knowing if you're in a meeting versus just chatting by the water cooler.
Exactly. Frames are sets of expectations about what's going on, what kinds of things will likely be said, and how they should be interpreted. The classic example is the doctor saying, "Please take off your clothes."
Right, means something totally different in an examination room versus somewhere else.
Precisely. The medical examination frame makes the request perfectly normal. Any other frame would make it highly inappropriate or alarming.
And conversations can involve shifts between frames.
Constantly. Think about a lecturer telling a quick joke. They briefly shift from the lecture frame to a humor frame, then shift back.
Okay.
There was a great study by Tannen and Wallet looking at a doctor examining a child with cerebral palsy. The doctor fluidly shifted frames using a playful, almost sing-song playing frame with the child, then a more formal consultation frame with the mother, asking about symptoms, and finally a very technical reporting frame when discussing the case with medical students who were observing.
Wow. And how do we know when the frame is shifting?
We use contextualization cues. These are signals that can be linguistic, like saying, "Okay, seriously now," or "on a different note," or changing your vocabulary or grammar.
Or nonverbal things.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Changes in tone of voice, pace of speech, gestures, posture, eye contact, facial expressions. All these can signal a shift in frame, telling others how to interpret what's coming next.
And people could deliberately change the frame, right?
Yeah.
For strategic reasons.
Yes, that's reframing. It's a powerful rhetorical move. A politician, for example, might be asked about a specific controversial statement they made. Instead of answering directly, they might reframe the entire discussion.
Like shifting the topic.
Exactly, or shifting the lens through which the topic is viewed. Remember when Donald Trump was asked about calling women fat pigs and slobs?
Vaguely, yes.
Instead of addressing those specific comments, he reframed the issue as being about the problem of political correctness, stifling honest speech. It completely shifted the ground of the debate away from his own words.
Ah, okay. That's a clever, if maybe evasive tactic.
It can be very effective. Another, perhaps more everyday, example is from Deborah Tannen's work on talking the dog.
Talking the dog.
Yeah, where someone uses playful talk directed at their pet to indirectly communicate something to a person who's also present. Like, a wife might see her husband left the door open and say playfully to the dog, "Oh, Ricky, is Daddy letting all the burglars in?" She's framing it as playful talk to the dog, but the message, her annoyance about the door, is clearly intended for her husband, delivered indirectly to avoid direct confrontation.
Huh. That's brilliant. Using a different frame to get a message across without starting an argument.
Precisely. Recognizing framing, reframing, and those subtle contextualization cues gives you a massive edge in understanding conversation. You can spot rhetorical moves, see how context is being shaped, and even learn to strategically frame things yourself.
This is all incredibly layered. Is there a way to bring all these different aspects, the context, the participants, the goals, the norms together to analyze a whole communication event?
There is actually a really useful framework for doing just that is Delheim's speaking model.
Speaking, is that an acronym?
It is. It stands for the different components Himes identified as crucial for understanding communicative competence, basically. What you need to know to participate successfully in any given speech event within a specific culture or community.
Okay, what does it stand for?
Right. So S is for setting the time, place, the physical circumstances, the psychological scene. P is for participants, who is speaking, who is listening, who's the audience, what are their roles and relationships. E is for ends, the purposes, the goals, the intended outcomes of the interaction. What are people trying to achieve? A is for act sequence, the actual sequence of communicative acts, the message form and content, how things unfold turn by turn.
Okay, SPEA.
K is for key, the tone, manner, or spirit of the act. Is it serious, playful, ironic, formal, sarcastic? I is for instrumentalities the channels used, spoken, written, signed, visual, and the specific forms of speech or language varieties being employed. N is for norms, the social rules. Norms of interaction, like rules for turn-taking or interruption, and norms of interpretation, how things are typically understood in this community. G is for genre, the type of speech event. Is it a lecture, a gossip session, a debate, a prayer, a sales pitch?
Wow, okay. That covers a lot of ground.
It does. And Himes emphasized that these components aren't separate boxes, they interact constantly. The relationships between them are where you often find the deepest cultural assumptions.
Can you give an example of how that works?
Sure. Think about that phrase used by some Hong Kong skateboarders. "Hey man, don't bite my shit."
Okay, Sounds aggressive.
It can be, but its meaning depends entirely on the interaction of the speaking components.
How so?
Well, the setting is usually a public skate park. The participants are skaters, often in crews with established hierarchies. The ends involve performing tricks, often being witnessed or filmed. Instrumentalities include skateboards, cameras. The act sequence involves taking turns, doing lines. The norms involve respect for originality, not copying someone else's unique trick or sequence.
So biting my shit means copying my tricks.
Exactly. But the key, the tone, is crucial. Said playfully between friends, it's a lighthearted reminder. Said seriously, maybe with an aggressive posture, it becomes a direct challenge, violating interactional norms and potentially leading to conflict. The genre, park skating versus street skating, might also subtly shift expectations.
So the exact same words carry completely different weight depending on the interplay of all those factors.
Precisely. The speaking model gives you a systematic way to unpack that complexity in any communication event, revealing the cultural knowledge embedded within it. It helps you see the whole picture.
That's incredibly useful. It moves us beyond just the words or the grammar. But what about when technology gets involved? Or other objects? How does that change communication?
That's a great question, and it leads us into mediated discourse analysis. This approach, drawing a lot from Vygotsky, argues that pretty much all human action is mediated by what we can call cultural tools.
Cultural tools, like hammers in computers.
Yes, those are examples of concrete tools. But the concept is broader. Language itself is a cultural tool. So are things like numbering systems, diagrams, maps, genres, even mental schemas or habits we've learned. Anything we use to interact with the world and achieve our goals.
So mediated discourse analysis says we shouldn't just focus on language.
Right. Focusing only on the talk or the text can give a distorted picture because actions are always accomplished through these tools in specific contexts. Ron Scollin's nexus analysis is particularly helpful here.
Nexus analysis?
Yeah, it looks at actions happening at the nexus of practice, the intersection point of three key elements.
Okay, what are they?
First, the cultural tools or texts being used, the actual artifacts, like a recipe book, a traffic sign, a smartphone app, a specific phrase. Second, the interaction order, the social relationships and dynamics involved, like the flow of pedestrians on a sidewalk or a family deciding what to eat. And third, the historical body.
Historical body? What's that?
That's the individual's unique baggage, their accumulated knowledge, habits, skills, experiences, memories, even their physical capabilities. Your driving habits, your dietary knowledge, your familiarity with a particular neighborhood, that's all part of your historical body.
And these things interact.
Constantly. And crucially, each of these elements has its own history, its own trajectory, what Scollin calls discourse itineraries. A simple street sign didn't just appear. It has a history involving traffic engineering, city planning, manufacturing processes. Your habit of taking a certain route home has a history based on past experience.
So even crossing the street is a nexus of practice.
Absolutely. Think about it. The action is mediated by cultural tools. Traffic lights, crosswalk paint, pedestrian signals. It's influenced by the interaction order. Are you alone, in a crowd, with a child needing attention? And it relies heavily on your historical body, your learned ability to judge traffic speed, your familiarity with local driving habits, your ingrained habit of looking left then right. If you go to a country where they drive on the other side, your historical body might fail you dangerously.
Wow. Okay. So even buying, say, a can of tomatoes involves this.
Definitely. Your decision isn't just based on reading the label, cultural tool in that moment. It's influenced by your shopping list, cultural tool, maybe a conversation about dinner plans, interaction order, your knowledge of different brands, or your dietary restrictions, historical body. The label itself has a whole trajectory behind it. Science, law, marketing. Your habit of grabbing a certain brand might bypass conscious analysis entirely. It shows how these little everyday actions connect us to vast systems of practice, economics, and ideology.
So this approach helps us see the bigger picture, how individual actions are embedded in these complex systems mediated by tools and histories.
Exactly. It moves discourse analysis beyond just talk and text to look at action in the world, mediated by all sorts of cultural tools.
And if we're talking about all these tools and actions, not just words, what about visuals, gestures, sounds? How do we analyze communication when it's happening across multiple modes at once?
Now you're getting into multimodal discourse analysis. This field tackles exactly that question. How do different modes like images, sound, gesture, gaze, writing, layout, even posture or clothing work together to create meaning?
So it's not just about adding pictures to text.
Not at all. Thinkers like Kress and Van Leeuwen showed that visual modes, like images, have their own complex grammar, their own ways of structuring meaning, drawing on Halliday's ideas about language functions.
So images have functions like language does.
Pretty much, yes. We can talk about the ideational function of images,
Right.
how they represent the world, the participants, and processes, through things like vectors. In a picture of someone throwing a ball, the line of the arm and the implied path of the ball create a vector showing the action. Gazes also create vectors. Someone looking at something directs our attention. Even a selfie shows processes. The act of taking the photo, the mental state shown in the expression.
Okay, representing the world. What else?
The interpersonal function. How the image creates a relationship with the viewer. Think about camera angle. Looking up at someone can make them seem powerful. Looking down can make them seem vulnerable.
And eye contact.
Exactly. Someone gazing directly out of the image creates a direct connection, a demand for engagement. Someone looking away creates distance. A selfie often uses that direct gaze to create intimacy.
And a third function?
The textual function. How the image organizes itself. How it creates a coherent message. Since images are spatial, not linear like text, this involves layout.
Like what's in the center versus the edges.
Yes. Or top versus bottom, left versus right. Often, the left side represents given or known information, and the right side represents new or important information, guiding the viewer's reading path. The center is usually the nucleus of the information.
So layout isn't just about aesthetics, it's about structuring meaning.
Absolutely. But meaning isn't just within each mode. It's crucially about the relationships between modes, intermodal relationships. How does the text relate to the image? How do gestures align with speech? How does music affect the mood of a scene?
And we often use many modes at once.
All the time. Think about modal density, how many modes are being used, and how intensely. Imagine talking on the phone while simultaneously pointing at something for someone else in the room and making a facial expression.
Right, you're juggling multiple modes for different purposes and audiences simultaneously.
Exactly. The density and combination of modes tells us a lot about the complexity of the interaction and where attention is focused.
And one last key idea here.
A really powerful one from Kress is transduction. This is the idea of translating meaning from one mode into another. It's not just representing the same idea in different forms. It's about rethinking and remaking meaning using the specific affordances of a different mode.
Can you give an example?
Think about describing an action using verbs in speech and then drawing it using lines and vectors. Or a filmmaker using music and color, instrumentalities, to transduce an emotion that might be harder to convey through dialogue alone.
Or those ASMR videos.
That's a perfect contemporary example. They try to transduce physical sensations, touch, texture, through carefully crafted sounds. It's about evoking an experience in one sensory mode by stimulating another. It highlights how meaning-making is a fundamentally creative, transformative process across different semiotic resources.
This is amazing. It just opens up a whole new way of looking at everything: ads, websites, social media, even just chatting with someone. It's all a complex, multimodal performance.
It really is. To truly understand communication today, you have to look beyond just the words and analyze the whole multimodal ensemble. It gives you a much richer, deeper understanding of how meaning is made and interpreted in our world.
It certainly empowers you to read things on a whole different level, noticing all those visual cues, gestures, sounds.
Exactly. You start seeing the full spectrum of communication.
Wow, what an incredible journey through these deeper layers of communication. We've gone from unspoken meanings in conversation and the dance of interaction to how we manage our public selves, frame situations, and analyze whole events, then exploring how tools mediate our actions, and finally how meaning is woven across multiple modes like speech, image, and gesture.
It really shows that communication is so much more than just exchanging information, doesn't it? It's about performing actions, building relationships, negotiating identities, constructing realities, and using a whole toolkit of resources, linguistic, social, technological, multimodal, to navigate the world.
Absolutely. Understanding these concepts, pragmatics, face, framing, the speaking model, mediation, multimodality, it gives you, our listener, such a powerful lens. You can start to see the strategies at play decode the hidden intentions, understand the cultural assumptions.
And hopefully become a more mindful and effective communicator yourself. By being aware of these layers, you can make more conscious choices about how you interact, how you present yourself, how you frame things, and how you use different modes to get your message across effectively and appropriately.
It really is like getting a decoder ring for human interaction. You start noticing things you never saw before in every conversation, every email, every social media post, every advertisement.
So the question to leave you with is this. Now that you have a glimpse into these intricate workings of communication, from unspoken inferences to multimodal design, how might you start applying this awareness? How can you use these insights not just to analyze, but to actively shape your own interactions and better understand the complex messages swirling around you every day?
A fascinating question to ponder. Until next time, keep observing, keep questioning, and keep deep diving into the incredible world of language, interaction, and meaning. Welcome. Welcome to the deep dive. You know, we use words all day, every day. We text, we talk, we scroll, and we generally think we understand each other.
We do, mostly.
But what if every conversation, every news headline, every single advertisement isn't just communicating information? What if it's, well, a meticulously constructed piece of a much larger puzzle?
Something that's subtly shaping our very reality without us even knowing it.
Exactly.
That's the fascinating paradox, isn't it? And it's right at the heart of our deep dive today. We're stepping into the world of discourse analysis. It's a field that offers you a kind of X-ray vision, really. It allows you to see beyond the surface of language.
So not just what people say.
Not just what, but what they really mean. And how they choose to say it. And maybe most critically, why those choices matter in building our social world, you know?
Right. So our mission today is to give you a bit of a shortcut, equip you with some foundational concepts from this incredible discipline.
Yeah, the core ideas.
And by the end of this deep dive, hopefully you won't just hear words, you'll start to see the hidden, well, the architectural plans of communication.
That's a great way to put it. We're going on a journey, starting with the ambiguities we run into every day.
All the time.
All the way to the profound, almost invisible ways language actually constructs our social realities, how it influences our perceptions.
Get ready to see and hear language in a whole new, much more powerful light. Okay, let's unpack this with our first big idea. And it's a fundamental one, I think. It might challenge some assumptions. It's the inherent ambiguity of language itself. I mean, we all try to be clear communicators, right?
I do. We strive for it.
But the truth is, language is fundamentally ambiguous. People don't always say what they mean.
And they definitely don't always mean what they say.
Yeah. And the fascinating thing is, this isn't necessarily about deception, although, you know, that happens.
Sure, it does.
But it's actually built into the very nature of language.
That's such a crucial starting point. We often operate under this assumption that words are like perfect little containers for our thoughts, right?
Yeah.
Delivering them pristine and clear.
Like precise tools.
But the reality is far more fluid. And there are maybe two core reasons for this inherent ambiguity. Firstly, language is, at its heart, an imperfect tool for expressing the full spectrum of human experience. Think about it. Poets spend lifetimes trying to capture a fleeting emotion. Lovers struggle to articulate the depth of their feelings. Even lawyers whose profession relies on precise language.
You think they'd have it nailed.
Exactly. They constantly grapple with interpretation and nuance. Our source material points out quite clearly that language is simply insufficient for precisely expressing all thoughts and feelings. There are just limits to what words alone can convey.
Like trying to describe, I don't know, the Grand Canyon using only 2 colors. You get a hint, but you miss the majesty, the depth, the whole thing.
A perfect analogy. And second, whenever we communicate, whether we realize it or not, we're almost always trying to communicate more than just one thing at a time.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's layered.
It's rarely a single isolated message. It's usually multifaceted.
Okay, so let's make this concrete. We've all been there. Someone asks you, do you have a pen?
The classic example. On the surface, literally, it's a question about possession. Are you holding a pen right now?
Do you own one? Is it nearby?
Right. But almost universally, you understand this as an indirect request. They want to borrow one.
Yeah, 99% of the time.
And this isn't just a quirk. It's actually a pretty sophisticated social maneuver. Why do we do this? Often it's because we want to communicate our need, sure. But simultaneously, we want to signal politeness, maybe deference, or just a desire not to impose.
So you're managing the social relationship at the same time.
Exactly. We're being mindful of the other person's face, Their public image will get more into face later, so we approach the request indirectly, even if we know perfectly well they've got a pen sitting right there. It's a subtle social dance embedded right in the structure of how we ask for things.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think, because sometimes that ambiguity isn't just a polite social dance.
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely deliberate. It's a powerful tool used for persuasion, sometimes even manipulation.
Definitely. Think about advertising. A food manufacturer might have a product that doesn't meet the government's official criteria to legally claim it's low in sugar.
Right. There are strict rules for that.
So instead, they'll prominently display less sweet on the label. Now, this gives customers the impression of a healthier option. It implies a benefit.
Without actually making a direct, legally regulated, or frankly, necessarily true claim.
Precisely. It's brilliant in its subtlety. It uses an indirect linguistic choice to suggest a desired attribute they can't outright state.
And you see this constantly in politics, don't you? Especially in heated debates.
Oh, constantly. Politicians frequently employ strategically ambiguous language. It allows them to avoid taking clear, definable positions that might alienate different parts of their base.
Or maybe send different messages to different audiences at the same time.
Exactly. It lets them send subtly different signals simultaneously. For instance, a phrase like law and order, depending on who's hearing it, that can resonate very differently. For one group, it might signal a desire to crack down on social dissent, maybe maintain traditional hierarchies.
But for another,
It might simply mean a general desire for safer communities, respect for the rule of law. The ambiguity lets both interpretations coexist.
okay.
Similarly, look at how people seeking asylum are sometimes referred to. Using the term migrants rather than, say, refugees can subtly question their legal right to refuge. It frames their movement more in economic terms.
Rather than as fleeing persecution.
Without explicitly stating an anti-refugee stance, the word choice does the work.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? Why does understanding this inherent ambiguity matter so much?
Well, it's like developing a superpower, isn't it, for deciphering the world around you.
Yeah.
It helps you detect those subtle attempts at manipulation, whether it's in an ad trying to sell you something, a political speech, trying to sway your vote.
Or even just a casual conversation where someone's trying to dodge a direct answer.
Your new superpower isn't just spotting the ambiguity, it's starting to uncover the unspoken agenda.
Asking yourself, okay, what specific belief or action are they trying to bake into my mind here without directly stating it?
That's where the real power of this insight lies, moving beyond just the surface meaning to critical engagement, thinking about the function of the ambiguity. Hashtag 1.2, what makes a collection of words a text?
Okay, so words are slippery, ambiguous. Now let's move from that slipperiness to the very building blocks of communication itself. When do words stop being just random sounds or symbols on a page and become something meaningful, something we actually call a text?
Right. Let's try a little thought experiment. Imagine I just give you a list. Milk, spaghetti, tomatoes, rocket, light bulbs.
Okay. Milk, spaghetti, tomatoes, rocket, light bulbs.
You might look at that or hear it, and your first reaction is probably, that's not a text. It just feels like a random collection.
Yeah, it doesn't seem connected. Makes no sense on its own.
And you'd be right to feel that initial disconnect. But according to the linguist M.A.K. Halliday, a key figure here, the factor that transforms a collection of words into a text is meaningfulness.
Meaningfulness.
He views a text as everything that is meaningful in a particular situation. Think of language like a giant menu full of choices.
Okay.
Every time you speak or write, you're making choices from that menu, choosing yes instead of no, up instead of down, red instead of green.
Choosing spaghetti instead of rice.
Yeah. Exactly. According to Halliday, it's these choices, this selection from a set of alternatives that fundamentally creates meaning. And this focus on meaning is what really distinguishes Halliday's approach from some other linguists who might prioritize purely linguistic forms like syntax or morphology.
So he's less about the grammar rules first, more about the meaning first.
Pretty much. For him, a language isn't just a set of grammatical rules. It's fundamentally a system of meanings accompanied by forms through which the meanings can be expressed. The meaning we want to convey drives the structure, not the other way around, usually.
Okay, that makes sense. So those seemingly random words, milk, spaghetti, tomatoes, rocket, light bulbs, They lack what Halliday calls texture, is that right?
That's the term, yes, texture. It's the quality that differentiates a proper text from just a haphazard string of linguistic items. It emerges from the context of choices we make, and crucially, the relationships between them.
The connections.
The connections. Our inherent ability as language users, to tell the difference between a truly random string of sentences and one that forms a coherent piece of discourse that comes from our awareness of this texture.
We just know it feels right or feels wrong.
We do. It's not just about the words themselves, but how they're woven together. Now, there are features within the language itself, like grammar, pronoun reference, conjunctions, that help us understand the relationships among words and sentences.
The linguistic clues.
Right. The problem with our initial shopping list example, milk, spaghetti, tomatoes, rocket, light bulbs, is that there isn't much in the language itself to help you immediately see those connections.
Then he shuts the list.
However, even in its raw form, there are maybe one or two very basic connections that start to give it some texture. The most obvious one.
They're together in a list.
Exactly. The simple fact that the items appear sequentially in a list. That sequential appearance automatically implies a connection. You assume they wouldn't be grouped together randomly if they didn't have something to do with one another.
It's like a basic assumption we bring to any list. A silent agreement. These items belong together somehow.
It's a foundational assumption, yeah. It gives it the tiniest bit of texture.
Okay, so we have our initial list. Milk, spaghetti, tomatoes, rocket, light bulbs. It's starting to get a little bit of texture just because it is a list, but let's build on that. Let's put it in context.
Right. Imagine a real-life conversation. Suddenly, this list makes perfect sense. Say, Franny asks, "What do we need to get at the shop?"
And Zoe replies, "Well, we need some milk. And I want to make a salad, so let's get some tomatoes and rocket. And oh yeah, the light bulb in the living room is burnt out. We'd better get some new ones."
Boom. Now, all of a sudden, the relationship between those words, those items, becomes much, much clearer.
Yeah, completely clear.
The word "and" isn't just filler anymore. It creates an additive relationship, suggesting they're all part of a cumulative plan, a shopping trip.
And we need connects these items to an action, getting stuff, and to the participants involved, Franny and Zoe.
Exactly. This expanded example perfectly sets the stage for the three fundamental pillars of textual relationships: cohesion, coherence, and intertextuality.
Okay, three big concepts. Let's break them down. First up, cohesion.
Cohesion. This refers to the relationships between words, sentences, or other linguistic elements inside the text itself. It's the internal linguistic glue.
Inside the text.
In Franny and Zoe's conversation, the repeated use of "and" to link the items, or the verb "need," which connects the items to a shared action, those are classic examples of cohesive devices.
Okay.
These are the internal linguistic ties that bind the text together, making it hang as a unified whole. Other common cohesive devices include things like pronoun "she," referring back to Zoe conjunctions like because or therefore, and what are called lexical chains, where related words appear throughout a text.
Like in a news article about fashion, you might see style, clothing, garment, runway.
Precisely. All linking back to the central topic, making the text flow smoothly and feel connected. That's cohesion.
That makes so much sense. It's the linguistic glue holding the sentences together. But thinking back to ambiguity, could the lack of clear, cohesive ties, or maybe even deliberate ambiguity in connections, be a strategy sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. You're right to pick up on that. It isn't always about achieving perfect clarity. Think about political discourse again.
Okay.
When, for example, a former U.S. president discussed controversial policy ideas, like a proposed ban on certain groups entering the country, his language sometimes involved a rapid succession of words like look, happened, people.
I remember that style.
This repetition and the seemingly connected phrasing gave the impression of cohesion, right? As if a clear argument was being built.
Yeah, it felt like it was leading somewhere.
Yet parsing it definitively was often really difficult because there was a lack of explicit logical connectors or clear reference for pronouns. This strategic ambiguity, this sort of surface-level cohesion without deep logical connection, made it hard to refute his statements directly.
Because he was loosely connecting different incidents to imply a threat or justify an action, but without stating a clear, easily attackable chain of reasoning.
Exactly. The listener felt a connection, a texture, but the meaning remained just elusive enough to deflect direct challenge. It's a skillful manipulation of cohesive cues.
Wow, that's a brilliant point about how cohesion, or the skillful manipulation of it, can shape meaning and influence narratives, even in very public discourse. Makes you realize how every word choice, every connection or implied connection truly counts.
Indeed. Okay, so that's cohesion, the internal stuff. Next color, coherence.
Coherence, this is different, right?
Very different. This is where you, the reader or listener, really come into play. Coherence is about the meaning that arises from your background knowledge.
Ah, what I bring to the table.
Precisely. Your understanding of social conventions, the specific social situation, your purpose for even looking at the text. Think back to our initial unconnected list. Milk, spaghetti, tomatoes, rocket, light bulbs.
Yeah, the random seeming one.
Even without the explicit connecting words from Franny and Zoe's chat, you could probably infer it was a shopping list. Maybe for groceries, maybe ingredients for a meal, maybe just household items.
Yeah, I guess shopping list.
That's coherence at work. You're drawing on your existing knowledge about shopping, food, lists, everyday life, to make sense of something that lacks those strong internal linguistic connectors, those cohesive ties.
So if cohesion is the internal linguistic glue, coherence is the external knowledge the reader uses to make it meaningful, to make it stick together in their head.
That's a great way to summarize. It really clarifies the distinction.
Okay. And finally, the third pillar, intertextuality. This sounds like a bit of a mouthful.
It does, but it's actually incredibly common, something we navigate constantly. Intertextuality refers to the relationships between one text and other texts out there in the world. Texts you might need to refer to, consciously or unconsciously, to make sense of the current one.
Okay, so texts connecting to other texts.
Exactly. Our Franny and Zoe shopping list isn't just a list floating in space. It's the result of their conversation that's one intertextual link. It might also relate to a recipes that are found online for rocket salad, another text.
Right.
Or when they actually go to the supermarket, the list will connect to the signs advertising the price of tomatoes or the expiry date labels on a milk carton. Those are other texts, too.
So no text is an island.
No text stands alone. It's always part of a larger conversation of texts and experiences. Think about something like a tweet with hashtags like #savage or #firstworldproblems.
Uh-huh.
That tweet is fundamentally intertextual. It links that specific comment to a vast universe of other similar discussions, other tweets, maybe memes, maybe ongoing cultural debates about social issues, privilege, or humor.
Or a news report about a political event.
Exactly. It almost always includes quotes from previous speeches, refers to past legislation, draws on economic statistics reported elsewhere. All of those are other texts that inform the current one that you need some awareness of to fully grasp the meaning.
That's a huge takeaway then for you, our listener. Every single piece of communication you encounter, every text, is woven into this vast, intricate tapestry of other texts and contexts.
Yeah.
It's never isolated, always part of a flowing river of meaning.
Absolutely. And understanding these three pillars, cohesion, coherence, and intertextuality, equips you to not just read words, but to deeply understand how they build meaning together in this incredibly interconnected world.
Okay, we've explored how words connect internally, cohesion, and externally, coherence, intertextuality, to form meaningful texts. Now let's zoom out a bit further. Let's look at genres. When we say genre, your mind might immediately jump to movie categories, right? Comedy, horror, sci-fi, or maybe music genres like rock or pop.
That's the common understanding.
But in discourse analysis, the idea of genre is much, much broader. It's more profound than just a simple text type or category.
That's right. Bhatia, who's a leading figure in genre analysis, offers a definition that really opens things up. He defines a genre as a recognizable communicative event characterized by a set of communicative purposes identified and mutually understood by members of the community in which it occurs.
Okay. Recognizable communicative event, mutually understood purposes, within a community. That sounds quite specific.
It is. What's critical here is that genres are seen as highly structured and conventionalized. They come with built-in constraints, sort of like rules of the game. Constraints on what can be contributed, its intent, its positioning within the interaction, its specific form, and its functional value within that particular community.
So there are expectations about what fits and what doesn't.
Exactly. And here's a fascinating twist. Expert members of a discourse community, people who really know the genre inside out, can actually exploit these constraints. They can use the expected structure to achieve their own private intentions, maybe subtly influence outcomes, all while staying within the recognized framework of that genre's social purpose.
Wow, that's really interesting. So it's not just about knowing the rules. It's about knowing them so intimately you can kind of bend them,
Yeah.
or use them strategically.
Precisely. It's about mastering the form to achieve specific, perhaps even hidden, goals.
Okay, give us an example that really brings this to life, something common.
Let's consider something most of us have either done or will do, writing a job application letter.
Ah, yes, the dreaded cover letter.
Exactly. This is a classic example of a genre in the discourse analysis sense. It has a very specific and highly conventionalized move structure.
A move structure.
Yeah, think of it as the expected sequence of steps or parts. The constraints of this genre dictate not just what information you include, qualifications, experience, but also how you include it, and, crucially, in what order.
Okay, like what?
Well, you typically start by clearly stating the specific post you're applying for. That's move 1. Then, move 2, you describe your qualifications and relevant experience, linking them to the job requirements. Move 3 might be expressing enthusiasm or fit. And finally, you'd conclude by requesting an interview, move 4.
Right, that sounds familiar. State the job, say why you're good, say you want it, ask for the interview.
Pretty much. Now imagine if you were to deviate significantly from this established order. Say you waited until the very last sentence to even mention the job you wanted.
That would feel weird, confusing.
Exactly. Or if you buried your core qualifications somewhere in the middle of a long story about your childhood pet. It would be considered highly unusual, maybe odd, definitely unprofessional. The move structure of a genre often determines how successfully you achieve its communicative purpose. Getting the structure right is almost as important as the content itself.
So it's not just about getting the information across, but getting it across in the right way, the expected way. It demonstrates that you understand the unspoken rules of this particular communicative event, this genre.
You've hit the nail on the head. Following the genre rules is often seen as almost as important as the content itself.
Why? What's the deeper significance of that?
This is where the real social power of genres emerges. What's truly important about these conventions isn't just that they make communicative events more efficient or predictable, though they do that too.
Yeah.
It's that they also serve to demonstrate to the recipient, the reader, the listener, that the producer of the text, you the applicant, knows how we do things around here.
Ah, it's a signal of belonging, of competence within that community.
Precisely. Prospective employers, for instance, aren't just reading application letters to find out your qualifications on paper. They're also assessing if you know how to write a job application letter. Your ability to successfully produce this type of genre, meticulously following its particular conventions, is often taken as an indication that you are a certain kind of person.
Someone who knows how to communicate like us.
Exactly. Someone who understands the professional norms of their community. And for some employers, this successful production of the genre, signaling competence and belonging to that specific discourse community, can actually be even more important than the specific qualifications described in the letter itself.
Wow. So the form can outweigh the content, in a way.
In some cases, yes, it's a powerful act of socialization. It functions almost like a gatekeeper to entry into that community or profession. If you can't master the genre, you might not get through the gate. Hashtag 2.2, creativity, expertise, and social control through genres.
Okay, so genres are these incredibly powerful, highly structured communicative events. They shape our interactions, they signal our identity, they can even act as gatekeepers within a community. But what about creativity? Does all this structure, all this convention, just stifle innovation? Or is it more complex?
That's a brilliant question, and it's definitely more complex.
Yeah.
The source material suggests that creativity within genres is only really possible because conventions exist in the first place.
How so?
Well, innovation becomes effective, it gets noticed, precisely because it plays with and exploits expectations that have already been formed by the genre's conventions. You need a baseline to deviate from creatively.
Okay, so you need the rules to break them effectively.
Exactly. However, this creativity isn't boundless. It can't just be random weirdness. It must always relate somehow to the communicative purpose of the genre and the specific context in which it's used.
Right. Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine writing a job application letter, but you write it in the form of a sonnet.
Okay.
Now, if you're applying for an editor position at a cutting-edge literary magazine, that might be incredibly effective. It demonstrates your literary prowess, your creativity, your ability to be unconventional within a specific creative field. It fits the context and purpose.
But if you're applying to be a sales assistant at a department store?
Probably not the best move. It would likely be seen as completely inappropriate, maybe even frivolous, and definitely counterproductive. The context and purpose dictate whether a creative deviation is seen as brilliant or just bizarre.
So you have to be really clever about where and how you choose to be creative within a genre. And I imagine that successfully bending or defying those established rules, when it works, is a clear marker of real expertise, right? Not just a random act of rebellion.
Precisely. Being able to successfully defy conventions in a way that's recognized as effective or innovative is very much a matter and a clear marker of expertise. To effectively break the rules, to innovate in a way that gets recognized as brilliant rather than merely incompetent or clueless, you generally must first demonstrate that you have truly mastered those rules.
It shows you know what you're doing.
It shows a deep, nuanced understanding of the genre's underlying purpose, its audience, its conventional forms. It's not about ignorance of the rules, it's about informed strategic choice. Only experts can really break the rules well.
This raises a really important question then. If genres are so structured, so conventional, so tied to community expectations and signaling expertise, what's their broader impact on society? It sounds like they could be pretty powerful tools of social control, not just neutral templates for communication.
They absolutely are, and this is where genres reveal their profound societal significance. They aren't just neutral formats. Genres don't just link individuals together in communicative events, they also link people with certain activities, identities, defined roles, and specific responsibilities.
How do they do that?
In a very real and often quite invisible way, genres help to regulate and control what people can do and, maybe even more importantly, who people can be in various contexts. Think about a student writing an academic essay, or a scientist publishing research, or a citizen casting a vote using a specific ballot format. Each involves a genre that shapes the action and the identity.
Okay, so they regulate roles and identities. How else?
This regulation manifests in several powerful ways. Firstly, the goals of a community, what they value, what they aim for, and the approved ways those goals are supposed to be accomplished, are often subtly built in to the daily texts, the genres its members use.
Baked into the structure.
Exactly. This makes these underlying goals much more difficult to question or challenge because they're just part of how things are done. And since mastering the genre is frequently a prerequisite for full membership or success within that community,
You implicitly buy into and perpetuate the community's goals just by participating correctly.
Precisely. Think of filling out a standardized form. By filling it out according to the rules, you implicitly accept the categories, the questions, and the underlying purposes that form defines. You legitimize its view of the world.
That's subtle but powerful.
What else? Secondly, remember that texts always create certain kinds of relationships between their producers and users, like doctor and patient, student and teacher, citizen and government. When the conventions and constraints associated with the genres used in these relationships become fixed, maybe resistant to change over time, then the roles and relationships they create also become fixed and difficult to alter. They can solidify power structures.
So the genre conventions reinforce the social structure.
In essence, yes. When viewed this way, genres are far more than just text types structured in particular ways. They are powerful, almost invisible tools through which individuals, groups, and institutions define, organize, and structure social life. They maintain continuity, yes, but they can also potentially resist change by making existing roles and relationships seem natural and inevitable.
That's a really powerful thought. So the next time you're filling out a form, writing a formal email, or even engaging in a casual online forum with its own unwritten rules, remember you're not just communicating information.
You're participating in a social ritual.
A ritual that reinforces certain roles, relationships, and unstated community expectations. It shapes who you get to be in that moment, in that context.
It absolutely does. Genres are everywhere, structuring our social world.
Okay, we've talked about the inherent ambiguity of language and the powerful, almost invisible frameworks of genres. Now let's dive into something potentially even deeper, maybe more controversial. The non-neutrality of words and how texts, through often subtle choices, promote ideology.
Right, this is a core idea in a lot of discourse analysis.
Right.
Our words are never truly neutral. They can't be.
Never. That sounds quite absent.
Well, think about it. They always represent the world in a certain way, frame events from a particular perspective, and create specific kinds of relationships between the people involved in the communication. Because of this inherent perspectival nature, Every text, to some degree, whether consciously or unconsciously, promotes a particular ideology.
Okay, let's define that term carefully. What exactly do we mean by ideology here?
Sure. An ideology is essentially a specific set of beliefs and assumptions that people hold, often implicitly, about the world. Beliefs about what is good or bad, right or wrong, normal or abnormal. These ideologies provide us with deeply ingrained models of how the world is supposed to be.
Models of reality.
Exactly. On one hand, ideologies are incredibly functional. They help create a shared worldview within a group, a sense of common purpose, a basis for collective action. They help us make sense of things.
But there's a downside.
There is, and this is crucial for critical analysis. They also function, often simultaneously, to limit our perception of reality. They can marginalize, simplify, or even completely exclude people, things, and ideas that don't fit neatly into those predefined models.
It's like wearing a pair of ideological glasses that filter what you see and how you interpret it.
Even if you don't realize you're wearing them, they shape your perception unconsciously.
Okay, so if words are never neutral, and texts promote ideologies.
Yeah.
How do they actually do this? How does this construction of reality happen? How do these ideological models get built into the very fabric of the language itself, maybe in ways we don't even notice?
Well, according to Halliday again, we primarily represent the world through language by choosing words for two key elements. Participants, these are the people, things, or abstract concepts involved in whatever's happening.
The who's or what's.
Exactly. And processes these describe what these participants are doing or what is happening to them or what state they're in or what characteristics they possess.
The doing or being.
Right. James Paul Gee, another key figure, neatly summarizes this whole linguistic representation system as identifying the who's doing what's in any situation.
Who's doing what's? I like that. It's catchy.
It is. And it's vital to understand that texts don't simply represent reality neutrally, like a mirror. They actively construct it, depending on the specific words chosen for the participants and the processes.
The who's and the what's doing.
People can create vastly different impressions and therefore construct different realities of the very same event or situation.
Okay, I need an example to really grasp this. How can just choosing different words for who's doing what's fundamentally alter our understanding?
Well, let's illustrate with a clear example, maybe something you might see in the news. Imagine a public gathering, maybe a protest that turns confrontational. One newspaper might run a headline, "Rioting mob attacks city center."
Okay, sounds serious. Rioting mob and attacks.
Now, another newspaper covering the exact same event might report, "Citizens protest, police brutality."
Ah, very different. Citizens and protest.
See how the who's doing what's, the chosen participants and processes are drastically different? In the first, rioting mob is the participant, and attacks is the violent, active process. In the second, citizens are the participants engaged in the process of protesting.
This isn't just reporting the facts, is it?
It's constructing two very different realities of the same event. The choice of action verb, who we make the main actor, who gets agency, it shapes everything. This relationship between participants and processes, how actions and actors are linguistically linked, is called transitivity, and it's a remarkably powerful tool for ideological construction.
Okay, transitivity. Let's take another example, maybe the one from the source about the wedding ceremony.
Yes, that's a great one because it feels so traditional, maybe even benign, but the language choices are revealing. In a traditional church wedding ceremony, after the vows, the convener might pronounce the couple man and wife.
Still hear that sometimes.
By using different words, man, an independent entity, and wife, a relational term, this utterance portrays them as two fundamentally different and unequal kinds of people. It gives the man an independent identity, while the woman's identity is made contingent on her relationship to him. She's defined by her marital status to him.
Wow, I never thought of it quite like that. Man and wife aren't parallel terms.
They aren't linguistically parallel in the same way husband and wife are, and that reflects an ideology. Nowadays, many churches and ceremonies have consciously changed their liturgies to say husband and wife, or perhaps husband and husband or wife and wife, reflecting a deliberate move toward presenting the individuals as more equal partners using parallel terms.
Or sometimes they just say, I now pronounce you married.
Exactly. Focusing on the state of being married removes the specific gendered who's altogether, and thus sidesteps the potentially unequal relationship implied by man and wife. The linguistic choice constructs a different social reality.
That's a very clear illustration of how deeply ingrained those choices can be, and how they reflect or challenge ideology. What about the actions themselves, the processes? How do those choices shape reality in the wedding example?
The words chosen for processes are just as significant. In those traditional ceremonies, after pronouncing the couple, the convener might turn to the man and say, "You may now kiss the bride."
The iconic line.
Iconic, yes, but look at the transitivity. Here, the male participant, you, the groom, is constructed as the explicit actor or agent in the process of kissing.
He's the one doing the kissing.
He seems in charge, the one initiating the action. The woman, the bride, becomes the passive recipient, the object of the action, kiss the bride. This linguistic choice, seemingly innocuous, can reinforce deeply embedded cultural assumptions about gender roles in romantic and sexual relationships. Assumptions about male initiative and female passivity that might still be widely held in some parts of society.
Even though it's just a traditional phrase.
Exactly. The language carries the weight of that tradition and its embedded ideology. Modern changes, like saying, "You may now kiss each other," or simply the couple kissing spontaneously after the declaration without prompting, reflect a conscious shift towards more equitable representations of agency and partnership in that moment. Both partners are actors.
So the choice of verbs, who does what, who has the agency, it really matters ideologically. Are there different kinds of processes beyond just physical actions like kissing or attacking?
Yes, Halliday identifies several distinct types, which gives language a lot of flexibility in how it represents reality, beyond action processes involving physical actions.
Like kissing, running, hitting.
Right. There are also verbal processes, which involve saying or writing. Here, one participant typically acts as the speaker or writer, and another as the listener or reader. For example, he told her the news.
Okay, saying something.
Then there are mental processes, which involve cognition and feeling, thinking, believing, seeing, hearing, feeling, wanting, like she believed him or they feared the outcome.
Interstates.
Exactly. And finally, there's a particularly powerful linguistic phenomenon called nominalization. This is where a process, an action, or an event gets turned into a participant, into a noun, a thing.
How does that work?
So instead of saying someone kisses someone, which highlights the action and the actors, you might say kissing is a custom. The dynamic action to kiss is transformed into a static concept, kissing.
Ah, turning the verb into a noun.
Precisely. This is often characteristic of highly technical or academic texts. It allows writers to abstract actions into concepts, making complex ideas seem more stable, more objective, maybe less attributable to specific actors or agents. It can obscure the who's doing what's.
That's a lot of subtle layers to consider. Let's look at another example to see how changing the who's doing what's can really shift our perception in a profound way. The source brings up cigarette warnings, which is a fantastic real-world comparison.
A perfect and incredibly impactful example of reality construction through linguistic choice over time. Let's compare two official U.S. cigarette warnings from different eras. First, from the 1970s. A. Warning. The Surgeon General has determined that cigarette smoking is dangerous to your health.
Right, I remember seeing warnings like that. Very formal.
Now let's analyze the who's doing what's. In warning, A, the main participant, is the Surgeon General, a specific authoritative person.
Okay, the who is the Surgeon General.
The process is mental, has determined. It's about his cognitive process. And what about cigarette smoking?
That's the thing being determined about.
Exactly. It's nominalized, turned into a concept, and it's actually backgrounded in the sentence structure. It's linked relationally to an attribute, dangerous. So the warning is primarily a statement about a medical official's determination. The danger is relayed via an authority figure's mental process.
Okay, so the focus is on the Surgeon General's conclusion.
Now compare that to a more recent warning, say from around 2020. B, warning, smoking causes COPD, a lung disease that can be fatal.
Much more direct, starker.
Notice the shift in who's doing what's. Here, smoking, again a nominalization but now front and center, is the main participant. It's the who or what.
Smoking itself is the actor.
And what's the process? It causes COPD. That's an action process. Smoking does something directly.
From has determined mental to causes action.
This linguistic shift is profound. It portrays smoking itself as a much more active, agentive, direct cause of harm. The choice of participants and processes here constructs a much more immediate, direct, and inherently dangerous reality for the reader. It's no longer primarily about a medical official determining something. It's about the act itself causing direct, potentially fatal disease.
The language removes the intermediary, the Surgeon General's thought process, and places the agency of harm squarely on the act of smoking.
Exactly. It constructs a starker, more dangerous reality through transitivity choices.
That cigarette warning example really drives home how much changes just by tweaking a few words, especially the verbs and who's doing what, and how those choices can have real-world consequences in shaping public perception. Beyond just who's doing what's, how else do texts subtly promote ideology? You mentioned earlier that they also create specific relationships between communicators. How does that work?
This brings us to what Halliday called the interpersonal function of language. Texts shape relationships partly through modality. Modality refers to the words we choose to express things like certainty, obligation, permission, likelihood, or ability.
Words like must, might, can, should, will, may.
Exactly. These choices define the relationship between the speaker, the listener, and the message itself. They signal stance and authority. Let's return to the wedding ceremony for a moment. When the convener says, "You may now kiss the bride."
Okay, the modal verb is may.
The choice of may constructs the action as a matter of permission, not an obligation or a direct command. This subtle choice positions the convener as assisting the couple in doing something they presumably want to do, rather than forcing them or ordering them.
Right, if they'd said, "You must now kiss the bride," or just kiss the bride.
The dynamic would be entirely different. It would imply a direct command, fundamentally altering the relationship between the convener and the couple, signaling a different, perhaps more authoritarian power dynamic and a different social expectation about the nature of that kiss.
So even those little modal verbs, may, must, should, can, might carry a lot of weight in shaping how we understand authority, freedom, choice, and relationships within a specific interaction.
They absolutely do. They're constantly negotiating interpersonal meanings.
Okay. What about when texts refer to what other people have said? Quoting sources or reporting speech. How does the way we represent others' words construct reality and shape relationships, maybe with the original speaker or the information itself?
That's where discourse representation comes in. And it's another incredibly powerful tool for shaping perception and establishing or challenging authority. There are several key ways authors represent the words or thoughts of other people, and each carries distinct ideological implications.
Like what?
First, you have direct quotation. For example, according to the Surgeon General, smoking is the leading cause of preventable death in the United States. This directly reproduces the original words, usually enclosed in quotation marks, and explicitly attributes them to the source.
Gives it that feeling of authenticity.
Exactly. It lends an air of authority and authenticity to the text by linking it directly to the original source. The original speaker's voice is seemingly foregrounded, presented verbatim.
Okay, direct quotes. What else?
So second, there's paraphrase or summary. An example would be our earlier cigarette warning. The Surgeon General has determined that cigarette smoking is dangerous to your health. Here, the gist of what was said is conveyed, but not necessarily using the exact original words.
So you're reporting the idea, but in your own words.
Right. This allows the author of the current text to frame the information in their own terms, perhaps simplifying it, integrating it more smoothly, or highlighting specific aspects, even while still attributing the core idea to the original source. The author's voice, in a way, mediates the original message more strongly than a direct quote does.
Makes sense. Is there a third way?
Yes, and this one can be very subtly powerful. Selective quotation, often using what are sometimes called scare quotes or quote marks around just single words or short phrases.
Like putting quotes around just one word someone said.
Exactly. For instance, the Surgeon General has long warned that smoking is dangerous. These quotes around specific words highlight them. Now, they can be used neutrally, just to show these were the exact words used, but just as frequently they can be used to express skepticism, irony, or distance from the original statement.
How so?
They can imply a so-called, or as they put it, tone, subtly undermining the authority or truthfulness of the original, or suggesting the author doesn't fully endorse that specific word choice. It's a way of quoting while simultaneously commenting on the quote.
So even how you quote someone else, direct, paraphrase, selective, shapes how the audience perceives the message, the credibility of the original source, and the stance of the current author. That's really nuanced. What about assumptions that aren't even stated directly at all, but are just sort of understood, taken for granted.
That's presupposition, and it's incredibly powerful precisely because it operates below the level of explicit statement. Presuppositions are implicit assumptions about reality, about background knowledge that are indirectly presumed or taken for granted in text.
They're not stated outright.
No, but they must be true or assumed to be true by the speaker-writer for the utterance to make sense in its context.
Yeah.
Let's go back to, "You may now kiss the bride." That utterance not only uses may for permission, as we discussed, but it also presupposes a whole host of things. It presupposes certain cultural models about what marriage is, about gender roles, about what brides and grooms typically are and do, about the recognized role of a convener in a wedding ceremony.
If you heard that phrase in a completely different context, like a doctor's office,
It simply wouldn't make sense, because the underlying unstated cultural model, the necessary presuppositions, wouldn't apply. Presuppositions are potent because they bake assumptions into the very fabric of communication, making them much harder to challenge directly since they aren't explicit claims being made.
they just slip in under the radar.
Exactly. They shape our understanding, often without us even realizing we're accepting an underlying assumption. Hashtag 3.4 cultural models and discourses with a capital D.
This is all building towards something really big, isn't it? These subtle choices about words, participants, processes, modality, even how we quote others or what we presuppose, they're not just isolated incidents in individual texts. They seem to tap into something much larger, something deeply embedded in our culture.
Absolutely. You're putting your finger right on it. This is where we need to talk about cultural models, a concept powerfully articulated by James Paul Gee. These are think of them as frozen theories or common sense generalizations that we all carry around in our heads.
Frozen theory.
Yeah, simplified, taken for granted understandings about the world and how people typically behave in certain situations. For instance, we have cultural models about what a bride is typically like, what a groom is, what men and women are generally like, what marriage entails, even what constitutes love or success.
So the stereotypes and assumptions we operate with.
In a way, yes, but maybe less negatively charged than stereotype. They are incredibly useful. These models help us make sense of the texts and situations we encounter every day by providing a ready-made framework for interpretation. They make the world predictable.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
There is, and this is crucial. They also function to limit our perception of reality. Often unconsciously, they exclude certain people or certain ways of behaving that don't fit the established model. They are both guides and blinkers. They simplify reality, and in doing so, they necessarily omit complexity and variation.
Okay, so these cultural models provide our interpretive lens, but they also, almost by definition, narrow our view by highlighting what's considered normal or typical. And these models themselves, they're components of something even bigger.
They are. Cultural models aren't just floating around randomly in our heads. They are integral components of larger, more comprehensive systems of knowledge, values, ways of talking, ways of acting, and social relationships that develop and are maintained within societies and cultures over time. Gee calls these larger systems discourses with a capital D.
Capital D. Why the capital D?
To distinguish them from just discourse, as in language and use, capital D discourses are much bigger. They encompass ways of being, thinking, valuing, and interacting. Other thinkers have used similar terms. The French philosopher Michel Foucault, for example, talked about orders of discourse.
What are some examples?
Foucault cited examples like clinical discourse, the whole system of knowledge, practices, roles, and language used by doctors, nurses, and patients to understand and talk about health and illness. Or economic discourse, how we talk about money, markets, labor, value. Or psychiatric discourse.
Okay, so they're like entire ways of understanding and acting within a specific domain of life.
Exactly. Gee's definition is very comprehensive. He describes capital D discourses as ways of being in the world or forms of life which integrate words, acts, values, beliefs, attitudes, and social identities. They are the deeply ingrained social practices, often learned implicitly, that define who we are and what we do in various contexts, being a certain type of scientist, a certain type of student, a certain type of gamer, a certain type of parent.
This sounds incredibly far-reaching. Let's take our wedding example again. How does that phrase, "you may now kiss the bride," fit into this idea of capital D discourses?
Okay. That seemingly innocent phrase, "you may now kiss the bride," doesn't just reinforce a specific cultural model about how brides and grooms are supposed to act during a particular moment in a marriage ceremony.
Right, it connects to something bigger.
It implicitly invokes and helps perpetuate much broader theories, broader cultural models, about marriage itself, what its purpose is, who it's traditionally for, what gender relations are expected within it, how it connects to notions of love, sex, morality, maybe even familial economics. All of these intertwined theories and assumptions are part of a larger, pervasive system of discourse
A capital D discourse.
that we might call the discourse of traditional heterosexual marriage. And this, in turn, can intersect with and be reinforced by other powerful discourses that define and constrain our social world, such as the discourse of hegemonic masculinity, which sets dominant expectations for male behavior and identity, or the discourse of heteronormativity, which positions heterosexuality as the default, the unmarked norm. These are massive, often invisible, overarching systems that profoundly shape our understanding of identity, relationships, and societal norms, often without us even being aware of their pervasive influence.
Wow. So one little phrase can be a tiny access point into these huge, complex systems that structure our society.
It can act as a trigger, reinforcing those systems. And this kind of analysis, looking at these deeper layers, how language connects to power, ideology, and these large-scale discourses. This leads us to what's known as critical discourse analysis, or CDA.
CDA. What's the goal of CDA then? Is it just about criticizing?
Not necessarily criticizing in the sense of finding fault, though critique is often part of it. Critical discourse analysis is fundamentally an analytical approach that explicitly acknowledges the two-way street between language and society. It recognizes how discourse is profoundly shaped by the social world, by power structures, by history, by cultural norms, and simultaneously how the social world, including those power structures and norms, is reproduced, reinforced, and sometimes challenged by the discourse.
It looks at the interplay.
Exactly. Its primary purpose isn't necessarily just to find fault with people or their texts, but rather to uncover and understand the underlying power dynamics, the hidden ideologies, and the cultural assumptions that are at play within communication.
This is about making the invisible visible.
Precisely. It empowers us to see how seemingly simple linguistic choices like man and wife versus husband and wife, or causes versus has determined, embed much deeper societal implications. It allows us, and you, the listener, to ask not just what does this mean on the surface, but whose interests might this meaning serve? What reality is being constructed here? What possibilities are being opened up or closed down by this way of talking?
That's powerful. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion to get to the core of how meaning and power are intricately constructed through language. You'll definitely never hear, "You may now kiss the bride the same way again after this," I guarantee it.
You'll be looking for the capital D discourses everywhere.
Okay, so far we've touched on many fascinating aspects of discourse, ambiguity, text structure, genres, ideology that apply pretty broadly to both spoken and written communication. But now let's maybe hone in a bit on some of the special characteristics of spoken discourse. We speak far more often than we write in our daily lives, right?
You certainly do.
So are the dynamics really that different from written texts when we actually talk to each other?
Well, in many fundamental ways, speech and writing share similarities. When people speak, they also produce different kinds of genres. Think about casual conversations versus heated debates, academic lectures, or formal speeches.
Different types of talk.
Right, and people use different registers or social languages depending on the context when they speak, just like in writing. And, as we've just discussed, spoken communication absolutely promotes particular versions of reality or specific ideologies, just like written texts do.
Okay, so lots of parallels.
But there are some very significant ways in which spoken discourse is inherently distinct from most forms of written discourse. And these differences fundamentally alter how meaning is made and understood in conversation.
What are those key differences then? What makes speech so special, so distinct in its own right?
The most significant difference, generally speaking, is that spoken discourse is typically much less explicit and far more context-dependent than written discourse tends to be.
Less explicit, more context-dependent.
Okay. When we speak, especially face-to-face, we often rely heavily on the shared physical space, on our body language, our facial expressions, the tone of our voice, and immediate situational cues to help convey meaning. Things that aren't available in writing.
Right, all that nonverbal stuff.
Because spoken language leans so heavily on the immediate situation, interpreting it correctly requires a much deeper reliance on those contextual clues. If I just say, "Pass me that," without pointing or making eye contact or having established what that is.
I'd have no idea what you meant. That what?
Exactly, you'd be confused. A written instruction, on the other hand, usually needs to be far more explicit to function effectively on its own. Please pass me the red pen that's on the top shelf to your left. It has to build the context within the words.
Right. Gestures, facial expressions, where we're looking. They provide a whole extra layer of information in speech that we just don't get from words alone on a page.
But what about different types of spoken communication? I mean, a phone call is different from a live speech, which is different again from watching a TikTok video. Exactly, that's a great point. Even within spoken discourse, there's considerable variation in the richness of the available contextual cues, and this definitely impacts how meaning is made and understood.
How so?
Well, take telephone conversations. Participants are often in different places, right? So they cannot rely on physical cues like gestures and facial expressions to help convey meaning. In that specific way, phone calls actually resemble written discourse more closely than face-to-face talk does.
But they're still interactive in real time.
Highly interactive, yes. Then you have broadcast media or online video platforms, TV news, YouTube vlogs, TikTok shorts. Here, visual cues are present again. Gestures, facial expressions, background settings, clothing, they all provide a rich visual context.
But the interaction is different.
Right. Real-time, direct, back-and-forth response from the audience is typically limited or delayed. Though, as you hinted, modern online platforms really blur these lines, don't they? With comment sections, live chats, duets, or stitches on TikTok, they create a sense of pseudo-real-time interaction, blending the boundaries between broadcast and conversation somewhat.
Yeah, it's much more hybrid now.
It is, but the core idea holds. The multiplicity and the immediacy of the available contextual cues varies significantly across different spoken modalities, and this profoundly impacts the interpretive work required from the participants. More cues often means less need for explicit language, but potentially more room for interpreting those cues.
You mentioned way back in part 1 that key idea, people don't always mean what they say, and they don't always say what they mean. Does this become even more dramatic, maybe more prone to misunderstanding in spoken discourse, given its heavy reliance on context and nonverbal cues?
It absolutely does. That less explicit, more context-dependent nature of speech really amplifies this phenomenon of indirectness and, consequently, the potential for misinterpretation or misunderstanding.
Like the "do you have a pen" example.
Exactly. We revisited that, where a literal question about possession is pragmatically understood as a request to borrow. That's a common, almost unconscious indirectness we navigate smoothly most of the time. It relies on a tacit agreement within our social interactions about how requests are typically made politely.
My favorite example of this clash between literal and intended meaning, though, has to be the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon, the one with the coffee table.
Ah, a classic, and a truly brilliant illustration of pragmatic meaning versus literal meaning in conversation.
Remind us how it goes.
Okay, so Calvin's mother walks in and discovers him drawing, maybe with crayons, all over the coffee table. She exclaims, "What are you doing to the coffee table?"
Right, the classic parent reaction.
Now, is she genuinely seeking information about his artistic process?
No way.
Yeah.
She knows what he's doing. She's horrified.
Precisely. Her utterance, her question, is clearly a rebuke. It's an expression of shock, disapproval, anger. It pragmatically means something like, "Stop that right now. How could you? I'm furious."
But Calvin.
Calvin, being Calvin, responds with a stubbornly literal answer. He simply reports on his actions, maybe describing his drawing technique or the subject matter of his artwork on the table.
He completely ignores the intended meaning.
He deliberately ignores the intended pragmatic meaning, the mother's anger and command to stop, and responds only to the literal meaning of her question. The humor, of course, comes from this clash. By being uncooperative with the pragmatic intent, he ironically becomes the uncooperative party in the conversation, even though his mother didn't strictly say, "Stop drawing."
We, as competent communicators, instinctively expect the pragmatic interpretation, the intended meaning, to be prioritized in conversation.
That's the key, isn't it? We operate on the assumption that people will understand the implied meaning, the social context, the emotional intent behind the words, and when they don't, or when they deliberately choose not to.
That's where not only humor arises, but also genuine misunderstandings. Or maybe even deep ideological disagreements can erupt.
Precisely. This principle of prioritizing pragmatic contextual meaning over literal meaning extends to much larger politically and socially charged issues, where the stakes are incredibly high. Consider the powerful and widely adopted slogan, Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm. A very important statement.
Often it's met with the response, all lives matter. Now, viewed through this lens of pragmatics, the all lives matter response functions much like Calvin's literal answer.
How so?
It uncooperatively takes the slogan literally, stripping it of its crucial context. It misses, or perhaps deliberately ignores, the pragmatic meaning of Black Lives Matter. The slogan isn't intended to imply that other lives don't matter.
No, of course not.
Rather, it's a specific call to highlight a profound social situation, a specific context, where Black lives disproportionately face injustice, violence, and systemic disregard. A situation where, in practice, Black lives often do not seem to matter to institutions like the police or government in the same way that white lives often do.
So the slogan is pointing out a specific inequality and demanding it be addressed.
Exactly. By taking this slogan literally, the all lives matter, response serves to discount, ignore, or even actively silence that specific pressing social reality and the demand for justice embedded within it. It functions pragmatically to shift focus away from the specific issue being raised.
It's a prime example, then, of how misinterpreting context, or perhaps deliberately ignoring context for ideological reasons, can perpetuate disagreements and contribute to the erosion of understanding around critical social issues.
Absolutely. So the takeaway here is profound, I think. Interpreting spoken words isn't just about decoding sounds and dictionary definitions. It's about deeply understanding the context, the speaker's likely intent, the shared background knowledge, and the complex social realities being invoked by the utterance.
And without that nuanced understanding, we risk not only trivial miscommunication in our daily lives,
But also, far more dangerously, contributing to significant social friction and the active discounting of vital issues and perspectives. The lesson from Calvin and Hobbes echoes, perhaps surprisingly, in some of the most serious social debates of our time. Context is everything in spoken discourse.
Okay, now let's explore something we're all doing constantly in conversation, often without even realizing the intricate dance we're performing. We're constantly managing our social presence, our identity, and our relationships in every single interaction. This brings us to the concept of face. We all kind of know face in the everyday sense, right? It means something like honor or reputation, dignity, like giving face to someone, showing them respect, or losing face ourselves through embarrassment.
That's the common understanding, yes. But in sociolinguistics, particularly drawing on the work of scholars like the Scollins and others building on Goffman, face has a more precise and, crucially, a more dynamic meaning.
Okay, how do they define it?
They define face not just as an internal attribute you possess, but as the negotiated public image mutually granted to each other by participants in a communicative event.
Okay, let's break that down. Negotiated public image.
Meaning it's not fixed. It's actively constructed and adjusted during the interaction.
Mutually granted.
Meaning it's not solely something you possess or project. It's something you and your interlocutor actively co-construct and maintain together throughout an interaction. Your face depends on them acknowledging it and vice versa.
So my face isn't just my own self-image. It's co-created in the moment with the person I'm talking to.
Exactly. It's a dynamic, continuously negotiated public image that shifts and evolves with every utterance, every gesture, every choice we make. This means we're constantly engaged in this delicate balancing act, trying to present ourselves in a certain desirable way, maintain our own face, while also respecting and acknowledging the other person's desired public image, maintaining their face.
It sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but we become incredibly skilled at it, mostly unconsciously. Hashtag TAG 5.2 strategies for negotiating identity and relationships.
So if face is this constantly negotiated public image, this dance we do, how do we actually do the negotiation in real-time interactions? What are the practical strategies we employ, maybe often unconsciously?
Broadly speaking, discourse analysts identify two main kinds of strategies we constantly employ to manage face. The first are involvement strategies, sometimes also referred to as positive face strategies.
Involvement strategies. Okay, what's their goal?
Their primary purpose is usually to establish or maintain closeness, to foster rapport, build solidarity, and show friendliness. They address our desire to be liked, approved of, connected.
What do these look like in practice?
Well, things like using first names or nicknames, employing informal language or slang, showing interest by asking personal questions, complimenting the other person, emphasizing common experiences or shared points of view, oh, me too, and even sharing personal anecdotes to build that sense of connection.
So all the things we do to be friendly and build bridges.
Generally, yes. However, it's important to note that while these are often used to build rapport and intimacy, they can also be used, sometimes quite subtly, to assert power or hierarchy.
How can being friendly assert power?
Think about a teacher using an overly informal tone and maybe a nickname with a student they don't know well. Or a boss immediately using a first name with a new, much younger employee, perhaps without asking. Sometimes this can signal a power dynamic, establishing an uninvited intimacy that implicitly places the other person in a less powerful, perhaps subordinate, position. It presumes a closeness that hasn't been mutually established.
That's interesting. How something seemingly meant to build closeness can actually be a subtle assertion of power, or maybe even a boundary push if the other person isn't comfortable with it. I mean, just yesterday I caught myself using a much more formal tone with a new neighbor I barely knew. Even though I'm usually pretty casual, I guess I was subconsciously employing the other kind of strategy.
Almost certainly. You are likely using independent strategies, which are sometimes called negative face strategies.
Independence. Okay, tell me about those.
These strategies aim to establish or maintain social distance, show respect for the other person's autonomy, their space, and their desire not to be imposed upon. They address our desire to be free from constraint.
So the opposite of involvement, in a way.
In a way, yes. Examples include using titles like Mr. Miss Oxter Professor, employing more formal language, avoiding overly personal questions, minimizing imposition. Sorry to bother you, but using hedges and indirectness and offering apologies for taking up someone's time or asking for something.
All the ways we show respect for someone's personal space and autonomy.
Exactly. These strategies are often used to be polite, deferential, and to respect the other person's territory, their time, their freedom of action, their right not to be bothered. However, just like involvement strategies, they too can be used strategically in power dynamics.
Oh.
Well, as you hinted with your neighbor example, you might use formality to signal respect, but also maintain a comfortable distance. But conversely, a less powerful individual might use extreme formality with someone powerful. Think of maybe prisoners addressing guards with rigid titles and formality, partly as a way to create psychological distance, to assert a sense of self-respect, or to avoid being drawn into an unwanted familiarity imposed by the more powerful person.
So both closeness and distance can be strategically managed through these linguistic choices.
Absolutely. And in any given interaction, we are rarely using only one type. We're likely using a nuanced, constantly shifting combination of both involvement and independent strategies as we continuously negotiate our identities, our relationships, and the ever-shifting social distance between us and the person we're talking to.
It's a moment-by-moment, often unconscious, management of social power, intimacy, distance, and respect.
That's a perfect summary. It's the constant, subtle dance of face work.
It's incredible how much of this happens below the surface, shaping our daily interactions and the subtle power dynamics within them. Once you start noticing these face strategies, positive and negative politeness, you really do see them everywhere. From how a customer service agent addresses you on the phone, to how friends tease each other, to how colleagues interact in a meeting.
It's a constant, silent negotiation of relationship and identity.
Okay, so we manage our public image, our face. But beyond just managing who we are in an interaction, we also constantly signal what kind of activity we're actually engaged in at any given moment.
Yeah.
You can say the exact same words, but the context, the activity, drastically changes their meaning.
Absolutely. This is what discourse analysts often call framing. It's like a mental tag or a label we put on an interaction or a part of an interaction that tells us how to interpret what's going on.
A frame.
Yes. To understand one another, we have to interpret utterances not just in isolation, but within the context of some kind of overall activity or frame that we mutually recognize we're involved in. Frames are essentially sets of expectations, usually unspoken guidelines or assumptions about what kinds of things will typically be said, what kind of behavior is appropriate, and how words should be interpreted for different activities.
Can you give that classic example?
Sure, the classic and often darkly humorous example involves a doctor saying, "Please take off your clothes." The meaning, the implications, the level of alarm or compliance, and the appropriate response differ drastically if that utterance occurs inside a medical examination room within the recognized medical consultation frame.
Compared to if the same doctor said the same words in, say, their apartment during a casual social visit.
Exactly. In the second context, the frame is completely different. Social visit, maybe potential romantic encounter, maybe just creepy comment. And the interpretation and likely response would be vastly different, probably involving confusion, refusal, or calling the police. The frame of the activity dictates the legitimate interpretation and the expected social contract between participants.
So the frame sets the stage, tells us what rules apply, how to understand what's happening, and what's expected of us. But interactions aren't usually monolithic, are they? We don't just stay in one frame for a whole conversation. We constantly shift gears, moving from one mini activity to another.
Precisely. That's a key insight. Interaction rarely involves just one single, static, overarching activity or frame. We often engage in a variety of smaller, more local activities, shifting between different interactive frames, all perhaps nested within a primary, larger framework.
Like in a lecture.
Perfect example. A university lecturer might be explaining a complex concept using formal academic language that's an explanatory frame. Then they might pause and tell a self-deprecating joke to lighten the mood, shifting into a playful or humorous frame. And then, perhaps, they might notice a student texting and sternly rebuke them, shifting abruptly into a disciplinary frame.
All within the larger, overarching frame of university lecture.
Exactly. Another classic study by Deborah Tannen and Cynthia Wallet observed a pediatrician examining a young child. The doctor skillfully shifted frames throughout the interaction. They might use a playing frame with the child, employing simplified language, a higher pitch, maybe playful gestures, to put the child at ease.
Talking about the stethoscope being a telephone or something.
Right. Then they'd seamlessly switch back to a more formal technical consultation frame when speaking directly with the child's mother, using medical terminology and a different tone, adapting their language and demeanor to manage the different relationships and communicative purposes required by each frame.
Okay, so we're constantly shifting between these local frames. But how do we signal these shifts? They often seem very subtle, almost imperceptible in everyday conversation, yet somehow we usually pick up on them instantly. How do we know someone's joking versus being serious, or shifting from small talk to business?
It is often very subtle, and we primarily rely on what are called contextualization cues to signal and interpret these frame shifts.
Contextualization cues.
These are the subtle signals we send, often unconsciously, to show others what we think we are doing at any given moment, what frame we're operating within, and to negotiate these frame changes with others. They help create the immediate context for interpreting our utterances.
What kinds of cues are we talking about?
They can be linguistic cues. These might be specific words or expressions like, okay, seriously though, or all right, let's get down to business, or on a lighter note. They can also be choices about the language variety or register we use, maybe a sudden shift from very informal, slangy banter to highly technical jargon, signals a shift from a chatting frame to an explaining complex work stuff frame.
So words and style. What else?
They can also be paralinguistic cues. These involve nonverbal elements, a change in our tone of voice becoming quieter and more serious, or louder and more playful, a shift in facial expression, a playful wink suddenly changing to a stern, focused look, or even a change in our posture or body language, maybe leaning in conspiratorially to share gossip, or sitting back formally to signal the end of the casual chat and the start of the official meeting.
So tone, face, body language all signal the frame.
All these subtle signals work together, often unconsciously perceived, to create the immediate context for our utterances. They help us navigate complex social situations, manage expectations, and ensure our messages are interpreted more or less as intended within the appropriate frame.
So the next time you lean in, change your tone, drop your voice, or use a phrase like, just kidding. You're not just speaking, you're actively framing the interaction. You're subtly guiding the listener's interpretation, managing the activity, and ensuring you're understood within the right social context.
It's a fundamental social dance we all perform countless times a day, managing activities and meanings through these framing strategies and contextualization cues.
We've been talking a lot about context, haven't we? And how absolutely crucial it is to understanding any piece of discourse, especially spoken interaction. Now, we're going to look at a really classic framework that helps us analyze context in a very systematic, almost forensic way. It's Del Heim's speaking model.
Ah, yes, Heim's foundational stuff.
This model emerged from the idea that to truly understand what Himes called communicative competence, that is, what's necessary not just to speak grammatically, but to participate successfully and appropriately in a given interaction within a specific community, we need to look far beyond just the linguistic forms, the words and sentences.
That's right. Himes, who was a linguistic anthropologist, argued very persuasively that simply analyzing grammar or vocabulary gives you only one piece of the puzzle. To understand human communication fully, in all its richness and complexity, we need to understand the social and cultural context in which it occurs.
And the speaking model gives us a way to break down that context.
Exactly. It provides a wonderfully memorable mnemonic framework speaking, which breaks down the key components of any communicative event into 8 categories. It helps us analyze the intricate tapestry of context that surrounds every utterance. It's like a comprehensive checklist for systematically unpacking any interaction you observe or participate in.
I do love a good mnemonic. Okay, let's break down the acronym. Speaking, one letter at a time. What's S?
S is for setting and scene. Setting refers to the concrete physical circumstances, the time and the place of the interaction. Where and when is it happening? Is it a bustling marketplace at noon or a quiet library at closing time? A formal courtroom or a casual family dinner table? The physical environment and the temporal aspect profoundly influence communication. Scene is the psychological setting, the cultural definition of the occasion, like is it perceived as formal or informal, serious or festive?
Okay, setting and scene. Physical and psychological place. What about P?
P is for participants. This covers who the people involved are, the speaker, the listener's audience, anyone else present. And crucially, what are their social roles and relationships in this context? Are they a teacher addressing a student, a judge addressing a lawyer, a friend talking to a friend, a doctor speaking with a patient? These roles and relationships shape everything from vocabulary choices to levels of formality and expected deference.
Right.
E is for ends. What are the purposes, the goals, and the intended or actual outcomes of the communication? What are the participants trying to achieve? Is the goal to persuade someone, to inform them, to apologize, to entertain, to build solidarity, to negotiate a deal, or simply to pass the time socially? Understanding the ends helps interpret the strategies being used.
Makes sense.
A is for act sequence. This involves the actual sequence of speech acts that make up the event. What gets said, in what order. It includes both the message form, for example, is it a question, a command, a statement, a story, and the actual message content. What topics are being talked about, and how does the topic develop? How does the conversation unfold structurally?
Okay, the flow of talk. Next is K.
K is for key. This refers to the tone, the manner, or the spirit in which the communication is conducted. Is it serious or playful? Sincere or ironic? Enthusiastic or detached? Reverent or mocking? Formal or casual? The key signals the emotional coloring and the underlying attitude or mood of the interaction.
Got it.
I is for instrumentalities. These are the channels or modes of communication being used. Is it spoken face-to-face, written, telephoned, email, texted via video call? It also includes the specific language varieties being employed. Is it standard language, a particular dialect, a specific professional register or jargon, formal or informal speech? The choice of channel and code matters.
Channel and code. Okay, N.
N is for norms. These are the unstated, shared rules and expectations that govern the interaction and the interpretation within that specific community. This includes norms of interaction like turn-taking conventions, who speaks when for how long, how do you interrupt politely, appropriate levels of loudness or silence. And it includes norms of interpretation, what counts as a promise, a threat, a compliment, an insult, or a valid request in this particular cultural context. These norms are often the most culturally specific elements and the source of cross-cultural miscommunication.
Right, the unspoken rules of the game. And finally, G.
G is for genre. We've talked about this. This refers to the recognizable type of communicative event itself, like a debate, a lecture, telling a joke, giving a sermon, having a gossip session, conducting a job interview, writing a condolence note. As we discussed, genres are powerful frameworks that come with their own sets of expectations about purpose, form, content, and participants' roles.
Wow, that's incredibly comprehensive. Setting, participants, ends, act sequence, key, instrumentalities, norms, genre, speaking. What's truly fascinating, as Himes pointed out, is that even when the objective factors the participants, the physical setting remain objectively the same. The expectations about who should say what to whom, when, where, and how, all those norms and keys and act sequences can vary wildly across different communities and cultures. That subjectivity, that cultural specificity is key, isn't it?
Precisely. For Himes, this subjective and culturally specific nature of context isn't a bug, it's the entire feature. It highlights that communicative competence isn't just about following a fixed, universal set of grammatical rules, but about understanding and navigating a complex set of local, culturally specific expectations.
And experienced speakers can play with these expectations.
Exactly. Experienced speakers within a community don't just follow these expectations passively. They can, and often do, strategically manipulate them. This links to the concept, borrowed from the Prague School of Linguists, of unmarked versus marked usage.
Unmarked versus marked, what does that mean?
An unmarked usage is the usual, the expected, the default, the most common way of saying or doing something within a given context defined by the speaking components. A marked usage, however, is an unusual, a deviant, an unexpected way of using language in that context.
Like using extremely formal language in a very casual setting.
That would be a marked choice, yes. And when speakers deviate from the expected unmarked ways, they're not usually just breaking rules randomly or making mistakes, though that can happen. More often, they're making a strategic choice. This marked usage typically signals some special, more precise, or additional meaning. It might be used to manage relationships, to express a particular attitude, to create humor or irony, or to achieve particular interactional outcomes. It's a strategic manipulation of the shared expectations.
So analyzing the speaking components helps us see the baseline expectations, and then we can spot the marked choices and ask why that choice was made, what extra meaning it carries.
Exactly. The most important job for an analyst using this model isn't just to list the components, but to understand how they all link together in a dynamic interplay. How does the setting influence the norms? How do the participants' roles affect the key? How does the genre constrain the act sequence? It's about seeing the connections to reveal the deeper cultural assumptions about people, places, values, and communication itself that underpin that specific communicative event. No single component stands alone. They are all interconnected in a system.
The speaking model sounds like a fantastic, detailed checklist for understanding all the facets of context surrounding communication. But to truly understand those subjective expectations, those culturally specific norms, keys, and genres Himes talks about, you can't just analyze transcripts or recordings from a distance, can you? You need to get closer, somehow.
Indeed. Analyzing the text alone often isn't enough to grasp the deep, implicit cultural knowledge that participants bring to an interaction. This is precisely where ethnography comes in. It's a research methodology, originally developed in anthropology, but now absolutely central to many forms of discourse analysis and sociolinguistics.
Ethnography, what does that involve?
Ethnography is fundamentally concerned with describing and understanding the lived experiences of people within particular social groups or communities, not from an outsider's potentially biased perspective, but by trying to understand it from the inside.
Getting the insider view.
Exactly. It involves far more than just collecting and analyzing the texts and talk people produce from a distance. The core of ethnography is immersion. It means actually spending extended periods of time with the people you're studying in their own environment.
Living among them. Almost.
Sometimes, yes. Becoming what's called a participant observer. You immerse yourself in their world. You observe how they use language in their natural everyday settings at work, at home, and community gatherings. And crucially, you engage with them in lengthy, open-ended conversations, not just structured interviews, talking about the meanings they ascribe to different utterances, behaviors, and social practices. It's about understanding the why behind their communicative choices by observing, participating, and asking them directly, trying to grasp their perspective.
So it's about being deeply embedded in the culture of communication for that group, really digging into the nuances, the tacit knowledge, the cultural assumptions that a purely textual analysis, even using speaking, might completely miss or misinterpret.
Precisely. It sounds like a very labor-intensive process, and it absolutely is, but it's also incredibly rewarding because it provides that invaluable ground-level, culturally sensitive understanding.
How is it used specifically in discourse analysis?
Well, this ethnographic approach is now increasingly incorporated into many rigorous forms of discourse analysis because it adds that crucial layer of contextual depth. Genre analysts, for example, often don't just analyze the structure of texts. They might conduct ethnographic interviews with community members about the texts they use, how they use them, why they adhere to certain conventions, and what happens when people violate those conventions.
Getting the user's perspective on the genre.
Exactly. Critical discourse analysts, too, frequently look beyond the text itself to see how real readers or viewers actually respond to and perhaps contest the ideological formations embodied in media texts. They might conduct focus groups or observe discussions. It's not just about how ideologies are encoded by the producer, but how they are decoded and negotiated by the audience.
And for comparing across cultures.
Ethnography is absolutely vital for cross-cultural pragmatics, which studies how meaning is made and interpreted differently across cultural contexts. You really need that deep, immersive fieldwork to truly understand differing communicative norms, politeness strategies, and interactional styles, and crucially, to avoid simply imposing your own cultural assumptions onto another group's behavior. It's about breaking the gap between abstract linguistic theory and the messy, rich, culturally specific reality of human interaction.
Okay, so we've covered context in detail with the speaking model and the immersive research approach of ethnography. Now let's go maybe one step further, broadening our view even more. Let's look at mediated discourse analysis. This approach seems to see language not as the only thing to analyze, or even always the primary thing, but as just one of many cultural tools that shape our actions and interactions.
That's a great way to frame it. This approach draws heavily from the foundational work of the Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky proposed a really powerful idea that all distinctively human actions are not direct, simple responses to the environment. Instead, they are mediated, shaped, enabled, constrained through the use of what he called cultural tools.
Cultural tools. What counts as a cultural tool?
It's a very broad concept. These aren't just tangible technological tools like hammers, TVs, computers, or smartphones, although those are definitely included. They also encompass more abstract, symbolic, cognitive tools. Things like languages themselves, counting systems, diagrams, maps, scientific formulas, artistic conventions, social institutions, even mental schemas or ways of thinking.
So basically anything humans use to interact with the world or each other.
Essentially, yes. Anything that people in a community or culture use to take action in the world, to achieve a goal, to think, to learn, or to communicate, can be considered a cultural tool. Mediated discourse analysis, or MDA, adopts this broader, more holistic view. It recognizes that focusing only on the language used in an interaction can sometimes give us a distorted or incomplete picture of what's really going on. The environment, the objects present, the participants' histories, their bodies, they all play a crucial role in mediating the action.
That's a really expansive definition of tool and mediation. So
Yeah.
how does this broader view help us understand seemingly simple, everyday actions? It sounds like it might add a lot of complexity.
It does add complexity, but it also offers a much richer understanding. It leads to a powerful framework developed by Ron Scollin and Suzanne Wong Scollin called the Nexus of Practice. They argue that any social action we undertake, no matter how simple it seems on the surface, always takes place at the complex intersection, the nexus, of three key interlinked elements.
Okay, 3 elements at the nexus. What are they?
First, there's discourse in place. This refers to all the cultural tools, texts, signs, and semiotic resources that are physically present and relevant in a particular environment where the action occurs.
Like signs on a wall.
Exactly. So if you're performing the action of crossing the street, discourse in place would include physical elements like street signs, walk, don't walk, traffic lights, the painted lines of the crosswalk on the pavement, maybe the design of the curb ramps, even the sounds of traffic.
Okay, the environment's semiotic resources are the second element.
Second, there's the interaction order. This refers to the specific social relationships people have with others they're interacting with during the action. It's about the social dimension.
So am I alone or with people?
Right. Are you crossing the street alone, focused only on your own safety? Or are you part of a large crowd surging across together? Are you holding the hand of a small child, requiring you to distribute your attention between crossing safely yourself and ensuring their safety and pace? These immediate social relationships fundamentally shape your actions, your speed, your awareness, your communication, or lack thereof.
Makes sense. And the third element?
Third, and finally, there's the historical body. This isn't just the physical body, but refers to an individual's entire accumulated repertoire of knowledge, experience, habits, skills, memories, and mental models that they bring to the action, built up around that social practice over their lifetime.
My personal history with this activity.
Exactly. When you cross a familiar street near your home, you probably do it almost automatically, drawing on years of learned behavior, implicit knowledge of traffic patterns, ingrained habits. But imagine finding yourself in an unfamiliar city, maybe one where they drive on the opposite side of the road or where pedestrian rules are completely different.
Suddenly, crossing the street becomes a very conscious, difficult task.
Right. Your ingrained habitual ways, your historical body shaped by your past experiences might not work so well. You suddenly become acutely aware of all these mediating elements, the unfamiliar signs, discourse in place, the confusing actions of other pedestrians, interaction order, and you have to actively, consciously reinterpret your environment and figure out how to act appropriately and safely in this new context. Your historical body is being challenged.
So even a seemingly simple, almost unconscious act like crossing the street is actually this complex interplay of these three elements: the
Yeah.
physical environment and its signs, our immediate social relationships, and our own personal learned history and habits. That's truly mind-blowing when you stop to think about it.
It really is. And
Yeah.
then to add one more crucial layer of complexity, Scullin emphasize that these elements, the people, historical bodies, their relationships, interaction orders, and the discourse in place are not static. They're constantly changing.
Else.
They all have their own histories, their own discourse itineraries, as the Scullins call them. They evolve and change over time, and these changes affect how they interact at any given moment in the nexus of practice. For instance, the physical layout of a street intersection, discourse in place, might change due to new urban planning or shifting traffic patterns over the years. Your personal understanding and habits for crossing that street, historical body, evolve from your first cautious attempt as a child to your 100th confident crossing as an adult. And your relationship with companions, interaction order, changes. A parent will cross the street very differently, managing attention and physical contact differently when they're with a boisterous 5-year-old versus when they're with a more independent, perhaps eye-rolling 15-year-old child.
Right. The whole dynamic shifts depending on the age of the child.
All these factors, the environment, the people, the relationships, and their individual histories are constantly in motion, dynamically influencing the seemingly simple action as it unfolds in real time.
This is a really powerful shift in perspective. It tells us that our seemingly simple daily actions aren't simple at all. They're deeply embedded in these complex, evolving systems of cultural tools, social relationships, and personal histories. It highlights how profoundly interconnected everything really is, transforming how we might understand human agency, interaction, and even learning.
It moves discourse analysis beyond just talk and text to look at embodied action in the material and social world.
Wow. Okay, we started this deep dive talking about how language itself is ambiguous and constructs meaning. Then we explored the structures that organize language, like texts and genres, and how they shape our social reality and identities. We looked at ideology, spoken interaction, context. Now let's push beyond language itself, or language primarily, and consider the full spectrum of communication in our modern world, which is increasingly visual, interactive, and data-rich. This brings us first to multimodal discourse analysis.
Right. This is a really important and rapidly growing area. Multimodal analysis is founded on a core principle that seems obvious once you state it, but has profound implications. Discourse includes far more than just spoken or written language.
Oh, them words.
Much more. It encompasses a whole rich tapestry of communicative modes. This includes nonverbal communication, gestures, gaze, posture, images still and moving, music, sound effects, graphic design, the physical arrangement of objects in a space, like furniture in a room or the architecture of a building, and even things like the typography and layout of text on a page or screen.
So basically, any way humans make meaning.
Pretty much anything that carries meaning potential. Think about a typical face-to-face conversation again. People don't just use words, they communicate simultaneously through their hand gestures, shifts in where they're looking, subtle facial expressions, how they hold their bodies, their choices of dress, how close or far they stand from each other. All of these modes contribute interactively to the meaning being made in that moment.
And it's not just spoken interactions, right? Even what we traditionally call written texts are rarely just words these days, especially online or in magazines.
Indeed, that's a crucial point. Modern written texts, especially in digital environments but also in print, rarely consist solely of words anymore. They almost always include pictures, charts, graphs, embedded videos, hyperlinks, interactive elements, and even seemingly simple choices like the specific font used, the colors chosen, the amount and placement of white space on a page, or the way paragraphs are arranged visually on a screen or a physical page. All of these can convey significant meaning. They subtly influence how we interpret the verbal message, setting a tone, implying importance, guiding our eye.
How do analysts approach studying all these different modes systematically? It sounds complicated.
It is complicated, but there are frameworks. Halliday's systemic functional grammar, which we discussed earlier in terms of language choices, has actually been highly influential here. Multimodal analysts, building on Halliday's ideas, extend his framework. They propose that other modes like images, music, architecture, even gesture also possess a kind of grammar.
A grammar for pictures.
Yes, in the sense that they have systems of resources or networks of options that users choose from, consciously or unconsciously, to create different meanings. Just like we choose words and grammatical structures from the system of a language, different choices create different meanings.
That idea of a grammar for images or music is really fascinating. Who developed that further? How can we think about images having structure like language?
Well, the most famous and arguably most influential application of this idea is the work of Gunther Kress and Theo van Leeuwen, particularly in their seminal book, Reading Images, The Grammar of Visual Design. Before their work, many people assumed images were too vague or inherently ambiguous to be understood systematically on their own, often seen as just illustrating or decorating language.
Right. Pictures need captions to make sense.
That was often the assumption. But Kress and van Leeuwen powerfully demonstrated that images are not dependent on written text to convey complex meanings. They argued that images have their own sophisticated ways of structuring and organizing, meaning their own visual grammar. This includes principles for composition, how elements are arranged, perspective, the angle of view, modality, how realistic or abstract an image is, information value, where key information is placed, for example, top versus bottom, left versus right, framing, how elements are connected or disconnected, salience, what draws the eye, color symbolism, and so on.
Wow. So there's a whole system for reading images critically.
Absolutely. And this analytical framework, looking for systematic, meaning-making choices within a mode, has since been extended by them and others to analyze other modes, such as music, looking at rhythm, melody, harmony, instrumentation as choices, architecture, space, light, materials, color, the design of web pages, even mathematical symbolism. The goal is to reveal how all these different modes systematically contribute to the overall communication.
So if meaning is made through all these different modes, does the meaning stay the same when it gets expressed differently? Like if you describe something in words versus drawing it?
That's a key question, and the answer is usually no. The meaning doesn't stay exactly the same. This dynamic process of meaning changing as it moves across modes and media is known as resemiotization.
Resemiotization, meaning it gets re-signed.
Exactly. Meanings are transformed, reshaped, and often take on new implications or affordances as they're expressed through the specific resources and constraints of different modes and media as the social practice unfolds over time. Rick Edema offers a really compelling example of this in his study of the process of planning and building a new hospital wing.
Okay, how did the meaning change?
He showed how the meaning associated with the project, its goals, its challenges, its design features, shifted dramatically as it was expressed first orally in initial planning meetings, characterized by negotiation, discussion, maybe ambiguity, then translated into the precise, formal written language of architectural reports and specifications, emphasizing regulations, budgets, technical details, then represented in the graphic language of architectural drawings and blueprints, highlighting spatial relationships, aesthetics, flow, and finally, realized in the physical materiality of bricks, mortar, glass, and steel, creating the actual physical structure and user experience. Each resemiotization, each move to a different mode, shaped and reframed the meaning, emphasizing different aspects, involving different stakeholders, and creating different constraints and possibilities.
So the medium really does affect the message, or at least reshape it significantly.
It absolutely does. And closely related to this is the concept of transduction. This is more specifically about the process of communicating meanings that were initially expressed in one mode using the resources of a different mode.
Like translating between modes.
Kind of. Think of how a verbal description of movement or force might be translated or transduced into the direction and thickness of vectors and lines in a physics diagram. Or how the subjective tasting texture of a crispy apple might be communicated or transduced through the specific amplified chewing and crunching sounds used in a food advertisement. It requires maintaining some core aspect of the original meaning while deploying entirely different semiotic resources from the target mode.
So a lot of meaning is made not just within each individual mode, like the grammar of an image, but critically in how all these different modes work together in a particular text or interaction.
Precisely. We are constantly engaging with and interpreting intermodal relationships. Text might explain or anchor the meaning of images on a PowerPoint slide. A lecturer might use hand gestures to visually trace the process they are describing verbally. Background music in a film sets the emotional tone for the visual scene and dialogue. These modes constantly interact, complementing, reinforcing, sometimes even contradicting each other to create a complex, layered meaning.
And we often use multiple modes at the same time for different things.
Yes. In any given interaction, we often deploy multiple modes simultaneously, but perhaps dedicate them to different, often layered, higher-level actions. This leads to the concept of modal density.
Modal density.
It refers to the intensity or complexity with which a particular mode is being engaged or deployed at a given moment in an interaction. Analyzing modal density can tell us a lot about how participants are managing and directing their attention, what they consider important. For instance, imagine you're on an important phone call. Auditory mode is primary for the main task, but you're simultaneously pointing emphatically to an item on a shopping list for your partner who's about to leave. Visual and gestural modes. The high modal density of your visual and gestural cues in that moment, the pointing, your focused gaze, maybe a furrowed brow, might signal that the shopping list item is currently demanding more of your immediate attention, or is more critically important right then, even if the phone call is arguably the more important overall activity.
So we're constantly orchestrating this complex symphony of modes, directing attention, making meaning through multiple channels at once.
We are. It's like we're all constantly interpreting this incredibly rich, dynamic tapestry of signals, not just decoding words, to understand the world and interact with others. This multimodal perspective reveals us all to be incredibly sophisticated communicators, often without consciously realizing the complexity of what we're actually doing second by second.
Multimodal analysis helps us see the rich complexity of communication beyond just words, incorporating visuals, sound, gesture. Now, let's turn to a different but equally powerful approach that allows us to see patterns within language, patterns that are often completely invisible to the naked eye when we just look at individual texts. This is corpus-assisted discourse analysis.
Right. Moving from the micro details of multimodal interaction to the macro patterns in vast amounts of text.
So first off, what exactly is a corpus in this context, and why is it such a game changer for discourse analysis?
A corpus, plural dot corpora, is essentially just a large collection of texts, or nowadays it could even be multimodal data like transcribed speech with video links that is organized and stored in a digital format. The key is that because it's digital, it can be searched, analyzed, and manipulated efficiently using specialized computer programs, corpus analysis software.
And when you say large, how large are we talking?
We can be talking about massive amounts of data. There are huge general reference corpora, like the British National Corpus, BNC, or the Corpus of Contemporary American English, OCA, which contain hundreds of millions or even billions of words of written and spoken English from diverse sources. Or researchers can build their own more specialized corpora focusing on very specific genres or topics, like a corpus of all business letters from a certain company over 10 years, or all academic articles in a particular field, or political speeches by a specific leader, or millions of social media posts about a certain event. The sheer scale is what makes it potentially revolutionary for certain kinds of questions.
Okay, so instead of closely analyzing, say, 5 or 10 texts qualitatively, you're analyzing potentially thousands or even millions of texts quantitatively using software.
Yeah.
What are the big benefits of doing that? Why go to all that trouble beyond simply having more data?
The benefits are substantial, and they help address some of the inherent limitations or criticisms of purely qualitative discourse analysis, which sometimes relies on potentially unrepresentative examples.
Like what benefits?
First, it obviously allows for large-scale analysis. You can move beyond potentially subjective insights gleaned from studying a small number of texts and instead analyze vast data sets. This allows you to identify widespread patterns and compare patterns of language use systematically across different circumstances, like comparing news reporting in different newspapers, or language use across different time periods, or between different social groups.
So broader generalizations.
Potentially more robust generalizations, yes. Second, it adds a degree of empirical objectivity, or at least empirical grounding, to discourse analysis. You can systematically test theories or hypotheses that you might have formulated from your close qualitative reading of a few texts on much larger bodies of data. The corpus findings can either confirm, refine, or sometimes challenge your initial qualitative observations, making the analysis more rigorous.
Testing intuitions against big data.
Exactly. Third, and perhaps most powerfully for connecting back to our earlier discussion, corpus analysis can help us empirically detect those pervasive, often subtle, large-scale discourses with a capital D that shape society.
How can a computer find ideologies?
Well, not directly, but by identifying statistically significant recurring words, phrases like engrams, grammatical patterns, and especially collocations, words that tend to appear together statistically more often than chance would predict, like commit collocating with crime or refugees collocating with flood or threat in certain media across many, many texts.
You can pinpoint these larger, often unconscious patterns of language use.
Right. And these recurring patterns can signal specific underlying ideologies, power relationships, cultural models, and ways of framing reality. You can see how certain groups are consistently represented, how certain topics are habitually discussed, and you can even track how these discourses might change over time by comparing corpora from different periods.
What are some examples of studies that have used this?
Oh, there are many. Corpus methods have been used to study the shifting portrayal of refugees or immigrants in media coverage over decades, to analyze gender representation in popular culture, like the Star Trek franchise, by looking at who speaks more and what verbs they use, or to track the evolving discourse surrounding topics like male homosexuality or climate change in news reports or parliamentary debates over time. It allows you to see the subtle, large-scale shifts in societal narratives reflected in language patterns.
That sounds incredibly powerful for understanding widespread social narratives and ideological shifts that would definitely be impossible to detect reliably with just a few hand-picked examples. But I imagine there must be limitations or challenges to relying solely on computers for language analysis. Language is so nuanced, so context-dependent, as we've spent this whole time discussing.
You're absolutely right to be cautious. There are crucial limitations, and it's really important for anyone using or reading corpus analysis to understand them clearly. One significant limitation is that texts in corpora are, by necessity, taken out of their immediate, rich social contexts. A computer program simply sees words and phrases in sequence. It's generally blind to the nuances of the real-world communicative situation, the speaker's tone of voice, the visual cues, the specific historical moment, the relationship between participants that we know are so vital from ethnographic or interactional analysis.
It loses the speaking context, basically.
Much of it, yes. Another major challenge is what some analysts call the face value problem. As we discussed right at the very beginning of this deep dive, people don't always say what they mean. Discourse analysis often involves inferring meaning, precisely when it's not said directly through irony, metaphor, understatement, implication.
Things computers are notoriously bad at understanding.
Exactly. Computer analysis typically takes language at face value. It counts words and patterns literally, which means it can easily miss those subtle, indirect meanings, the emotional overtones, the strategic ambiguity, or the pragmatic functions we've explored. And remember, words often have multiple meanings depending on the context, but a simple frequency count might lump them all together. High frequency doesn't always equate to deep significance, and low frequency doesn't mean insignificance.
So it's not a purely scientific, objective, automatic process that just spits out definitive answers about meaning or ideology. There's still a crucial human interpretive element involved, isn't there?
Precisely. That's perhaps the most important takeaway. Corpus-assisted discourse analysis, and note the term assisted, is often described as art, not a purely objective science. It provides incredibly powerful empirical insights into patterns of language use, but it absolutely requires a significant amount of interpretive work by the human analyst to make sense of those patterns in relation to context, theory, and potential ideological implications.
The computer finds the patterns, the human interprets their meaning.
Exactly. It doesn't provide definitive answers on its own, but rather offers additional empirically grounded information to make our educated guesses, our interpretations much more educated, much more robust, and our theory building more evidence-based. It helped avoid relying only on anecdotal evidence. For this reason, it's often seen not as a theory in itself, but as a theory-neutral method that assists in applying various discourse theories, whether it's genre analysis, pragmatics, or critical discourse analysis.
Can you briefly mention how one actually uses it? What does the process involve?
Sure. Building a good corpus involves careful methodological steps. First, deciding very clearly on the specific types of text or interactions you want to investigate, then ensuring you gather a representative sample that avoids obvious bias. Then comes cleaning the data, which might involve removing extraneous code like HTML from web pages, and often tagging the data for specific linguistic features, like part-of-speech tagging.
And then the analysis.
Then, various analytical procedures can be applied using corpus software. Common ones include generating simple word frequency lists, calculating type token ratios, which measure lexical diversity, analyzing concordances, which show you every occurrence of a specific word and its immediate surrounding context, the cotext, identifying significant collocations, words that statistically tend to appear together, finding keywords, words that are statistically unusually frequent in your corpus compared to a larger reference corpus, and using dispersion plots, which show how keywords are distributed across different texts or parts of text within the corpus.
So it's a toolbox of techniques for finding patterns.
It's a powerful toolbox. It means that while corpus analysis gives us this incredible macroscopic view, revealing broad trends and patterns invisible to the naked eye reading individual texts, it still crucially needs the qualitative interpretive skills of discourse analysis to truly unlock the deeper, situated meaning and significance of those patterns. But used together, combining the breadth of corpus analysis with the depth of qualitative analysis, they offer a uniquely robust way to understand widespread social narratives, ideological tendencies, and the subtle power of language on a societal scale.
It's truly a deep dive into the hidden and often unconscious layers of language, from the smallest interaction to the largest societal trends. Hashtag tag outro. Wow, what a journey we've been on today. We really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into discourse analysis.
We certainly did. From the ground up, really.
We started by wrestling with that fundamental idea, the inherent ambiguity of language, realizing that even a simple, "do you have a pen?" is never really just a question.
Right. And then we explored the fundamental building blocks of text, understanding how cohesion, the internal glue, coherence, what we bring to it, and intertextuality, links to other texts, all work together to weave words into meaningful tapestries.
Then we zoomed out to the powerful, often invisible world of genres, seeing how they're not just categories like horror or comedy, but profound social regulators that shape identity, activity, and signal belonging.
That realization that knowing how to write a job application letter is about so much more than just conveying information. It's about performing competence within a community. That was key.
Absolutely. Then we peeled back the layers even further to reveal how texts are never neutral. They're always promoting ideologies, constructing reality through those subtle choices in who's doing what's, modality, how other voices are represented, what's presupposed.
Leading us to those big capital D discourses, those systems of knowledge and power like traditional marriage or economic discourse that shape our whole worldview, often without us noticing, and how critical discourse analysis tries to make those visible.
We took that special detour into the unique dynamics of spoken discourse, too. How context and indirectness get amplified, leading to everything from Calvin's charming humor with the coffee table
to potentially profound social misunderstandings in things like political slogans, where ignoring the pragmatic context can have serious consequences.
And finally, we uncovered how we constantly negotiate our public image through face strategies, that dance of involvement and independence, and how we subtly frame our interactions using contextualization cues, signaling what we're doing and how our words should be interpreted, all laid out systematically in Heim's speaking model.
And we didn't stop there. We even touched on how our actions are mediated by a whole ecology of cultural tools in the nexus of practice, looking beyond just language, and how communication is increasingly multimodal, using images, sound, gesture with their own grammars. And finally, how analyzing vast data sets with corpus analysis can reveal hidden patterns in language use on a societal scale.
It's a lot to take in. But if there's one big thing we hope you, listening right now, walk away with, what would it be?
I think it's this. Your everyday reality, the stories you believe, the roles you play, the very structure of your society isn't just out there, existing independently, waiting to be described neutrally by language. It's actively being built moment by moment through every word, every image, every interaction, every text.
Language doesn't just reflect reality, it creates it.
In a very significant way, yes. Every piece of communication you encounter, a casual text message, a news report, a political speech, an advertisement, a social media post, is not a simple, transparent delivery of information. It is, in fact, a carefully constructed artifact, and it's ripe for your own deep diving.
So your call to action, maybe, if you choose to accept it.
Start noticing, start applying these ideas. Think about this the next time you hear a politician carefully choose certain phrases like secure our borders versus manage migration flows, or when an ad promises farm-fresh quality without defining it.
Use that superpower we talked about, not just spotting ambiguity, but trying to uncover the unspoken agenda or the underlying cultural model.
Exactly. Pay attention to the who's doing what's. In the news you read, who gets agency? Who is passive? Catch the subtle face strategies people use in your daily conversations. Are they building closeness or maintaining distance, and why? Ask yourself what unspoken frames are at play in a debate online, or what cultural models a particular movie or commercial is trying to invoke and reinforce.
By doing this, but becoming more aware of how discourse works,
You'll be empowering yourself. You'll become a more critical consumer of information, and maybe even a more intentional, thoughtful producer of meaning in our incredibly complex, information-rich world.
you won't just be informed by knowing facts, you'll be truly well informed in a much deeper sense, capable of seeing or at least questioning the hidden linguistic and social forces that shape our understanding of reality.
It's about understanding the power of language and how it shapes us all.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the absolutely fascinating world of discourse analysis. Keep listening, keep questioning, and keep deep diving to the meaning that's all around you. Hey, deep divers, and welcome back. Today we're embarking on a pretty fascinating journey, I think, into the hidden layers of everyday communication. It's a field called discourse analysis. Forget the dense textbooks, though. We're aiming for a shortcut here, getting you truly well-informed by uncovering some surprising insights from really incredible research.
That's the plan.
Our mission today is really to explore the real-world applications of this analytical lens. We're going to see how these theories play out in, well, everything, from the food you buy to how leaders communicate, even, believe it or not, the subtle dance of online dating.
Exactly. We want to pull out those practical sort of aha moments, the ones that show you not just what discourse analysis is, but really why it matters in your daily life. We'll connect the dots between how language and visuals, too, are used in situations that seem mundane, maybe, and their profound impact on our understanding, our relationships, even, societal structures.
So get ready to see the world through a new lens. Okay, let's kick things off. How does discourse analysis help us uncover these hidden meanings? Especially in, like, the digital world and the products we use every single day. We're just constantly bombarded with messages, right?
Yeah.
What are they really trying to say?
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, I think, is how words, images, other signs, how they all work together. It's what we call multimodal communication, how they create meaning jointly. Our first example is a study by Bouvier and Chen. They looked at the gendering of healthy diets.
Gendering. Okay, so they looked at packaging.
Exactly. 100 health and fitness snack and drink packages from Europe. They really zoomed in on 4 specific ones: SCIMX protein flapjacks, Bounce energy balls, YouFit, and Slim Fast. You might even recognize some of those.
And how do they analyze them?
Using multimodal discourse analysis, which, simply put, is just studying how different communication modes, text, image, color, layout, how they combine to create meaning. So the researchers looked really closely at the visual elements, the language used, the design choices, to see how this packaging targets specific customers, particularly men and women.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to understand how ideas about gender get implicitly promoted, almost like buried in the packages through these strategic choices.
Right. And what did they find? Was it obvious?
Well, it was pretty insightful. Food manufacturers are incredibly strategic. They package these functional foods, for weight loss, energy, heart health, to appeal to very specific demographics. And the discourse on these packages, the way they talk, the way they look, it implicitly promotes particular ideas about gender roles and health. Often it just reinforces existing stereotypes without you even consciously noticing it.
Huh. So next time you pick up an energy bar or something, you should ask yourself, is this package talking to me? Or is it talking to some preconceived idea of who should be buying this? Might find some subtle gender cues there.
Precisely. And building on that idea of multimodal meaning, there's another study by Aslan. This one's on COVID-19 image macro memes, another huge digital space. He analyzed over 300 of these memes, the ones circulating during lockdowns, collected from Know Your Meme using terms like coronavirus, quarantine, things like that.
Oh, the images with funny captions. Yeah, we all saw loads of those. How did he analyze them? It seems less formal than packaging.
Well, he used pragmatics, which is basically the study of how context influences meaning, alongside that multimodal discourse analysis again. The focus was on how meaning gets created when the words and the images combine, how we resolve ambiguities, and also how memes link to other things, other texts, and even social identities. And what was learned is that memes often get their meaning, their humor, from that very combination of ambiguous pictures and captions. For instance, you remember that day still in quarantine meme, woman rolling belly fat with a rolling pin?
Vaguely, yeah.
It only really becomes funny if you share that cultural knowledge, that assumption about people improving their cooking skills during lockdown.
Right. Otherwise, it's just real.
Exactly. They communicate indirectly. They invite you, the viewer, to draw your own conclusions. And that fosters a sense of shared experience, solidarity. It shows memes aren't simple at all. They're actually pretty sophisticated multimodal texts. They use shared knowledge, ambiguity to build community.
Wow. So every meme you scroll past is like a tiny lesson in cultural communication, weaving together humor, shared experience, maybe a nod to a specific group, all in like, what, 2 seconds?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about how messages are constructed. What about how they, stick together? How do words and ideas actually cohere to form a meaningful message, whether it's like a serious essay or those super fast comments scrolling across a video?
Ah, coherence and cohesion. Yeah, let's look at a really interesting study here by Zhang and Kasani. It's about danmu. Ah, those are the user comments that appear and scroll across video screens, mostly on Chinese video sharing platforms.
Oh, right. Like the live comments you see overlaying the video itself sometimes. That sounds incredibly chaotic to analyze.
It is dynamic, definitely. The researchers initially tried applying, the traditional models of cohesion, how different bits of a text link grammatically or lexically, but they found those models a bit limited for Chinese, because in Chinese, cohesion often relies more on word choice, pragmatics, the context. Like pronouns can often be dropped entirely, and you still understand who's being talked about.
Interesting. So what did they focus on instead?
They focused more on lexical cohesion, word repetition, synonyms, and these things called deictic expressions. Those are words that point, like here, now, that one. But in this context, pointing to the video or the viewer's situation or even other comments scrolling by.
So how do people make sense of that barrage of text flying by?
Well, a lot of the work falls to the viewers, actually. You actively make connections using your own background knowledge. But the creators of the Danmu, the commenters, they also use unique strategies. Like they might refer to comments that have already scrolled past as the left because the text moves right to left.
Ah, that's clever.
Or use phrases like, wait for me, acknowledging the scrolling nature, trying to link their comment to something previous. It really shows how these digital platforms, the affordances like scrolling text, they actually give rise to totally new ways of creating cohesion.
Yeah.
Very different from traditional writing.
That is fascinating. It just shows the flexibility of discourse, doesn't it? How communities adapt language, visual cues to create meaning in these new, super fast-paced environments.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder for us as analysts, too. Our frameworks, our models, they need to be sensitive to these cultural and linguistic differences.
Yeah. So next time you're watching a video with live comments zipping by, think about how those fleeting messages are actually forming this dynamic, interactive text in a completely novel way. Okay, the internet is just a hotbed for new communication forms, isn't it? Constantly evolving. Let's dig into how researchers are studying these online genres. Things like product reviews or maybe makeup tutorials.
Yeah, these studies often show how digital genres kind of blend and adapt features from older, analog forms, creating unique spaces. Let's jump to Batia's study on YouTube makeup tutorials, using videos from a popular creator, Michelle Hill, as examples. This is a perfect case of genres reinventing themselves online.
Right. So, okay, beyond just showing you how to apply eyeshadow, what's the deeper communication going on there? What did the analysis find?
Well, the analysis used genre analysis. That means looking at the communicative purpose, the conventional structures, the typical moves within a text type, and it focused on how these tutorials do genre bending and genre blending.
Wow.
What was learned is that these tutorials, they very cleverly blend features from traditional instructional genres, structured steps, commands, specialized beauty jargon, positioning as an expert.
Okay, yeah, the how-to part.
Right. But they blend that with elements of personal narrative. Things like an informal tone, sharing personal opinions, maybe some self-deprecating humor, addressing the audience directly as you guys.
Ah, so the creators aren't just teachers then. They're doing more.
Exactly. They're performing multiple roles all at once. They're a teacher, sure, but also a participant in the community and often what's called a prosumer. Yeah, someone who's both producing content and consuming or promoting products, maybe through affiliations. And this creative interdiscursivity, as the study calls it, this blending of styles, lets them engage different audiences and achieve really complex goals. It shows how genres adapt to new media, multiple purposes. It's kind of a masterclass in creating both intimacy and authority simultaneously, often serving, both educational and commercial aims.
That's brilliant. So next time you're watching an online tutorial, maybe notice how the creator isn't just instructing you. They're also building a relationship, fostering a community, and, subtly influencing your choices. It's really sophisticated stuff.
Definitely.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Our words are never truly neutral, are they? They always paint a picture, create a relationship, and subtly, or maybe not so subtly, promote a particular worldview, an ideology. How do researchers actually uncover these ideological undercurrents?
Yeah, this is where critical discourse analysis comes in. It's a method that specifically examines the relationship between language, power, and ideology. And the next studies really show how this approach can reveal the political and ideological agendas embedded in language, even in something as public as a national debate.
Right, you mentioned the study by you and Sui on the Chinese feminization of male teenagers debate. That sounds like a really charged topic.
It certainly was. They analyzed, I think, 27 Chinese language news articles from early 2021. These articles were all debating a government proposal titled Prevention of Feminization of Male Teenagers. The critical discourse analysis focused on the underlying discourses, with a capital D, meaning the systems of thought and language that were invoked, and also the legitimation strategies used to argue for and against this proposal.
Legitimation strategies,
Yeah.
like how they tried to make their arguments sound valid or acceptable. What kind of strategies did they find in such a sensitive debate?
What's really fascinating and quite revealing is how distinct ideological positions emerged, each using specific linguistic tactics. On one side, there was what the study called the anti-feminine discourse. This argued that femininity in men, often associated with derogatory terms like sissy boys or maybe little fresh meat, was presented as a threat to national survival.
Wow, strong claim. How did they try to legitimize that?
Through several strategies, like categorization assigning negative traits to femininity, positive ones to masculinity, naturalization portraying femininity as somehow inherently bad or detrimental, also authorization citing vague experts warn, but without providing actual evidence, and abstraction making feminization sound like this big, pervasive, almost existential threat.
Okay. And what about the other side of the debate?
Well, in stark contrast, you had the anti-gender stereotype discourse. This side countered by appealing to shared societal values. Things like egalitarianism, fairness, compassion. They argued that feminization was itself a derogatory term and warned about the potential harm to young people who didn't conform to traditional gender norms. So the study just vividly illustrates how language becomes this battleground for competing ideologies, each side using distinct rhetorical strategies to categorize, to legitimize their view, sometimes even to fearmonger.
That's a really powerful insight. It makes you realize when you hear a heated debate, you should listen not just to what people are saying, but how they're saying it. The choice of words, the framing of arguments, those subtle appeals to authority, they can reveal so much about the underlying ideologies at play.
Absolutely. Recognizing those strategies is crucial for critically engaging with public discourse.
Okay, let's move into our online interactions, especially when we're trying to build new connections. These are really fascinating places for discourse analysis. Let's maybe delve into the mechanics of, say, digital romance, but also, unfortunately, the darker side, digital exploitation.
Yeah, these next two studies show how subtle linguistic cues and conversational structures play a huge role in forming relationships online, for better or sometimes for worse. Let's start with the more sobering one, Lorenzo Deuce and Azura's investigation into online groomers and the use of compliments.
Right, that sounds incredibly important, but difficult. What exactly did they analyze?
They analyzed transcripts of online conversations. These were between adults who were posing as children, working with the Perverted Justice Foundation, and actual online groomers. Their analysis used pragmatics, focusing specifically on the speech act of complimenting, attributing credit for some positive quality. They looked at the topics of the compliments, the forms they took, and critically the timing of these compliments within these manipulative interactions.
That sounds chilling.
Yeah.
What did they learn about how compliments were being used in that predatory context?
Well, what they learned was disturbing but important. Common compliment topics were things like physical appearance and personality. Those are generally effective for building a sense of intimacy and shared values, right?
Yeah, it seems normal enough on the surface.
Right. But here, about half of the compliments were explicitly sexual. However, non-sexual compliments were strategically interspersed throughout the conversation. This seemed designed to build trust, maybe lull the victim, and also potentially evade detection software that flags explicit language.
Wow, so it was calculated.
Highly calculated. Compliments in this context are what the study calls multifunctional speech acts. They establish common ground, they test the victim's willingness to engage, they can isolate the victim. And most critically, they found that compliments often immediately preceded more explicit requests for photos, for meetings, for more sexually oriented chat. They acted as a kind of calculated prelude to abuse.
That's a deeply unsettling insight. It really shows the darker side of these discursive strategies. A seemingly innocent compliment can be a planned, manipulative step in a predatory sequence. It demonstrates how language itself can be weaponized to exploit trust and vulnerability.
It's a stark reminder.
Yeah. A very sobering reminder that on any online platform, the how and the when someone compliments you can be just as important as the what, especially if they seem to be sort of paving the way for something more.
Definitely something to be aware of.
Okay, let's shift again. How do leaders rally a nation? Or, on a different scale, how do we present ourselves online without sounding, boastful? These next studies explore that delicate balance of power, politeness, and strategic communication.
Indeed. Let's look first at how discourse shapes effective leadership during a crisis. This is a study by Hafner and Son on Jacinda Ardern's communication during COVID-19. They analyzed government press briefings by the New Zealand Prime Minister during the pandemic.
Ah, okay. I remember her communication style got a lot of attention globally. So, beyond just the policies she announced, how did she talk about the pandemic? What did the analysis show?
They used interactional sociolinguistics, which looks at how language functions in social interactions. They focused on framing how situations are defined and interpreted, positioning how speakers portray themselves and others, and the rhetorical strategies used. What was learned is that Ardern really enacted strong leadership through her discourse. She positioned herself as an empathetic coach. Yeah, and the New Zealand public were positioned as her teammates, mutually responsible for overcoming the virus together. She consistently framed the virus as a dangerous threat, the government as a protective force, but crucially, citizens as cooperative team players.
That's interesting. A lot of leaders use war metaphors, didn't they? Fighting the virus. Did she do that?
That's a great point. And no, generally she avoided the war metaphor, which was common elsewhere. Instead, she often used sport metaphors, things like going hard and going early. This seemed aimed at fostering collective action, team spirit, and avoiding maybe the acrimony that war metaphors can sometimes create. And when she was challenged by reporters, say, questioned about plans, she'd strategically shift her footing, often moving from I to we have a plan, to emphasize that collective effort. They also identified a frequent three-step coaching pattern she used to address public concerns. First, show empathy. Second, provide a negative vision of what happens if people don't comply. And third, explain the collective actions needed.
That's really powerful. It shows that effective leadership isn't just about having the right policies. It's also this powerful discursive performance. Carefully chosen frames, ways of positioning people can really unite a nation and get cooperation, especially during a major crisis.
It really highlights the performative aspect of leadership communication.
Okay, now let's zoom out again. How are our everyday actions, like planning a trip or even just buying groceries, embedded in these complex webs of communication? You mentioned discourse itineraries, these paths that guide our choices, often without us realizing.
Exactly. These next studies reveal how our interactions with the world are mediated by discourse, how images shape tourism, for instance, or how complex food systems are navigated or sometimes manipulated through the language on product labels. Scollin's work, The Discourse of Food in the World System, is a fantastic example of unpacking this.
Okay, this sounds like it really gets into the nitty-gritty of everyday life. What does Scollin analyze?
He looked at food product labels, yes, but also the broader discourse itineraries that influence food production and consumption. He illustrated it with two main examples: the simple act of buying a can of tomatoes and the complex task of managing a child's corn allergy. He used mediated discourse analysis, which tracks how discourse is shaped by the tools and technologies we use, like labels, websites, regulations, to connect these everyday actions and texts to much larger systems of discourse promoted by governments, corporations, science, etc.
Right, so even a simple can of tomatoes has a whole discourse itinerary behind it. How does that work?
Absolutely. That seemingly simple act of picking a can off the shelf is shaped not just by what you see on the label, ingredients, nutrition facts. It's also shaped by all these unseen trajectories of discourse. You've got scientists defining nutrition, lawmakers creating labeling regulations, manufacturers designing the packaging and marketing, and sometimes subtle ideological messages get embedded too. The example given was a phrase like working in a sensible environment. On a label, what does that even mean? But it projects a certain image.
Huh. Yeah, you see those vague phrases. What about the corn allergy example? That seems like very personal, high-stakes kind of discourse navigation.
It really is. For parents of a child with a severe corn allergy, they basically have to become expert discourse analysts just to read food label safely. Why? Because corn can be hidden under dozens of different derivative names: dextrose, maltodextrin, modified food starch, and so on. The label doesn't just say corn.
Oh.
So a simple word like new appearing on a familiar product can trigger this whole complex interpretive process for them. What's changed? Is it safe now? Do I need to research all these ingredients again? And the study points out how corporate interests often benefit from this kind of opaque, inaccessible language on food labels. It exerts a subtle control over consumer choices, and it can have real impacts on health.
Wow. So what's actually on your food label is really just the tip of the iceberg. There's this whole universe of discourse regulations, marketing, science, ideology, influencing what you eat. And sometimes, yeah, you really do have to become a discourse detective to understand it and make informed choices.
It really brings home how these little actions, like grocery shopping, are complex sites of engagement where personal habits, social interactions, and these vast discourse itineraries all converge.
Okay, we live in such a visual world now, don't we? Constantly
Yeah.
seeing images everywhere. But what are those images really saying? Let's zoom in on how visuals, especially in our digital spaces, convey meaning and maybe reinforce certain ideas.
Yeah, this brings us squarely into multimodal discourse analysis again, but with a strong focus on the visual. These studies show how images, layout, color, gaze, all these nonverbal cues contribute powerfully to meaning, revealing everything from societal stereotypes to very localized cultural expressions. Let's take the Albawardi and Jones study on Saudi women driving images.
Right, this was just after the driving ban was lifted in Saudi Arabia in 2018. A really significant moment. What images did they look at?
They analyzed 142 stock images, the kind used in news reports, websites, along with their metadata tags from places like Shutterstock, Getty Images, Google Images. They searched using the term Saudi women driving right after the ban lifted, and they used multimodal discourse analysis, focusing on three things: the ideational function, what or who is represented or excluded; the interpersonal function, the relationship created with the viewer; and the textual function, composition and layout.
Okay. And what did these stock images tend to communicate about this major event?
What was really striking was the uniformity of the images. They overwhelmingly depicted women driving either alone or with male partners or children. So the emphasis was very much on traditional family roles, even in this moment of change.
What was missing?
Crucially, the women activists who had actually campaigned for years, often at great personal risk, for the right to drive, they were conspicuously absent from these images. Their political role was effectively erased in this dominant visual narrative.
Wow, that's significant.
Yeah. And interpersonally, the images often showed women at close range, creating a sense of intimacy. Some looked directly at the viewer, often smiling, kind of inviting a positive feeling. But many used side views, creating more of a sense of detachment, almost portraying the women as spectacles to be looked at rather than active agents. So overall, these stock images, even though they came from various global sources, they tended to converge on reinforcing existing gender and ethnic stereotypes. They reflected perhaps more global, often Western, perceptions of how Saudi women should look or should feel about driving, rather than the complex reality on the ground.
That's incredible and a bit disturbing. Stock photos seem so neutral, just like placeholders. But this shows they can be incredibly powerful tools for perpetuating stereotypes, maybe even erasing important parts of a story, subtly shaping how we perceive global events and cultures.
It really highlights the ideological work that images, even seemingly mundane ones, can do.
Okay, finally, let's talk about harnessing the power of big data. Imagine analyzing millions, maybe billions of words to spot trends in how we talk about crucial issues. That's the idea behind corpus-assisted discourse analysis, right? Where big data reveals big insights.
Exactly. It combines the computational power of corpus linguistics analyzing massive text databases with the critical lens of discourse analysis. We can explore how this method can objectively uncover potential biases, for instance, in news reporting. Baker's study on Muslim representation in the British press is a really well-known example.
Right. That sounds like it could unearth some pretty sensitive findings tackling media bias head-on. What did Baker do?
Well, they analyzed a truly massive corpus, 200,000 articles, which amounted to about 143 million words. These came from 12 different British newspapers covering a wide range, published between 1998 and 2009. The corpus was built by searching for terms like Muslim, Islam, and related words. Then they used corpus-assisted critical discourse analysis, specifically focusing on collocation analysis.
Collocation, that's words that frequently appear together.
Precisely. Identifying statistically significant patterns of words that cluster around the search terms. This provides a quantitative, systematic way to detect patterns in how Muslims were being portrayed across this huge data set.
And what did that sheer volume of data reveal? Did it confirm anecdotal feelings about bias?
Well, what was learned is that the study found a pretty consistent pattern, a bias, you might say. Words like Muslims, Islamic, and Islam frequently collocated. They appeared significantly often alongside words related to what the study termed extreme beliefs. Examples given were words like fanatic, extremist, fundamentalist, jihad, militant.
So the data showed a statistical link being made in the press between Muslims and extremism.
That's what the quantitative evidence suggested, yes. A tendency across the British press samples to associate Muslims and Islam with extremism through these recurring word pairings. Now, it's important to add the study itself noted limitations. Not all uses of these terms were necessarily biased in context, of course, and they acknowledged that further research comparing portrayals of different groups or tracing quotes back to original sources would give even deeper insights. But the pattern itself was clear in the data.
That's really powerful, though. What might just feel like a vague bias or something anecdotal can actually be quantified, potentially proven using big data methods. It offers a more objective lens maybe onto these systemic patterns of representation in the media. Really makes you think about how our perceptions are shaped over time by the language we consume.
It absolutely does. It shows the value of combining computational methods with critical analysis.
Wow, what an incredible journey we've been on, diving through the worlds of discourse analysis. I mean, from dissecting those subtle gender cues on food packaging to understanding the powerful performance of leadership during a crisis, even uncovering deep-seated biases in media reporting, we've really seen just how much power lies in the words and the images that we use and encounter every single day.
Indeed. I think what connects all these really diverse studies is that fundamental insight. Language is rarely just neutral. It's not just describing the world. It's an active force. It's constantly shaping our perceptions. It's mediating our interactions. And it's reflecting and, yeah, often reinforcing broader societal values and power structures. So discourse analysis isn't just some, academic pursuit tucked away in universities. It's really a critical lens for navigating the complexities of our information-rich world.
Yeah. This deep dive really shows you, hopefully, that every text you read, every conversation you have, every image you see, it's like a rich tapestry of meaning. It's layered with clues about how our world is constructed, socially constructed, and maybe how we fit into it, or how we're positioned within it.
So maybe for your provocative thought today, we've explored how discourse always has intentions, right? Even when they're hidden, or maybe especially when they're hidden. Think about this. What discourse itineraries, those paths of language and text and images, are actively shaping your decisions right now? From maybe what you buy, to what you believe, to how you interact online. And what implicit ideologies might they be asking you subtly to buy into?
That's a great question to ponder. Keep those questions in mind, deep divers. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and keep unpacking the world around you.